pile up. And as usual, I'm, scratching my head how to organize it so we don't all talk at once. So this time I'm going to do it by your favorite or most frequently used, or just pick a random one, transceiver maker. I should actually include one more in here. Whoops, darn, can't edit it. Anyway, it's good enough. All right, anybody a fan of Yaesu?
Alpha Juliet 6 Victor.
Yeah, Alpha Echo 6 Yankee. I like the old FT1000Ds. Haven't used one in years, but I love that.
Yes.
I know there's a few more, but maybe they're not on right now. All right, let's go on to ICOM. So I think I have to sign up for this one. Oh, sorry, WD6T. I've got 3 of them here, although I've used lots of other radios these days.
Kilo 6, Kilo Mike. I think I have one of each, except Flex.
WV6JJJ 7610.
N6RO 9700 ICOM.
Oh, that's your most used transceiver?
No, that's actually Elecraft, but I have an
There you
ICOM.
go.
So
Well,
we
next
spread out the pile up.
Yeah, and I also miss the 1000 MP.
Yeah.
I don't.
I don't.
Clickety,
Suppose if we're talking
clickety.
about what you have, I should say that I have a 706 in my car.
That's not the question. Read the slide.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to Kenwood.
NA60 TS590.
A6TQ ES990.
M6FP 590SG.
Okay, now what about Flex?
I got them all.
Is that your favorite?
No.
Alpha Fox 6 Sierra Alpha. Flex, she's 6600.
Where's Chris?
Favorite or most frequently used? You have to choose one.
Right, flip a coin.
Well, then you have to explain why they're not the same.
Yeah. You'd love that, wouldn't you, Bob?
A lot of
All right.
contest lawyers here.
All right, moving on to Elecraft.
N6 Tango Victor, K4.
Alpha Echo 6 Juliet Victor upgraded K3.
Norway Delta 2 Tango K4.
Kilo 6 Juliet Sierra K3.
N6XI K4 right here.
Whiskey 6 Fox Bravo.
K5ZD, plain old K3.
Whiskey 6 Fox Bravo, K3S, K3, K2. There's a few more.
Yeah, WX5S K30.
Kilo 6 Gulf Hotel Alpha upgraded K3.
NU6T upgraded K3.
J6MM K3 with the K4 on order.
W6 Mike Yankee K3.
K3EST. K3ES.
Got you, Bob. There was a
Okay.
double though. Go ahead.
K3EST K3.
Kilo 6 Echo India, K3, K3S, and KX3.
W6IFN K3S.
Okay, now other, which includes homebrew.
Well, this is AE6Y again. I remember liking a KWM1 years ago, which I never owned but used.
KI6OY.
Well, I've got a Heathkit, but it's not a transceiver. Separate things. All right, I think that's everybody. So let's move on here. Okay, so here's the agenda. First, some club business. Then the bylaws say we need to vote on the budget in the June meeting. So we'll do that. And it's this time it's preliminary for a reason that I'll explain in a minute. Then we're going to have some contest chairman remarks from Andy. Bob's going to N6TV do a short technical presentation on serial port tips, managing them. And then Bob, K3EST, is going to give us a short presentation on the upcoming All Asia contest. And finally, our featured presentation, Randy Thompson, K5ZD, is going to kind of the second of a pair of talks, complementing Doug's talk from last month. This is what happens to your log after you submit it. All right, so first I want to mention that the NCCC website has been updated. The trophy page now includes some pictures from the awards meetings of 2017 and 2018, thanks to N6TV, and also a misspelling of recent RIDI Roundup gavels and WPX, the RIDI plaque. The resources page is constantly being updated with recent presentations, and there's other good stuff there to discover if you dig around. And if you need to get the password for the members only section, send me an email. And I want to just thank K6MM who quietly maintains this thing in the background and does a great job. We got one returning member, meaning he was a member and now he's a member again. Richard Hill, NU6T, formerly KG6JOT and AE6JW, licensed in 2002. He has a dipole and a vertical. He likes chasing soda. He says his favorite contests are CQP and sweepstakes. And there's no need for a vote if you're rejoining. But welcome back. And there's his QSL card. Okay, now I'm going to announce the future meetings, something that we've been a bit lax about doing. So now you can plan ahead. So the July meeting, July 13th, 7 p.m. with the usual 6:30 chat session. It's going to be focused on the islands on the air, both the program and the contest. Cesar Trifu, VE3LYC, is the director of the program, I believe. It's going to do the main presentation, and also Bob Cox, K3EST, will talk a bit about the contest, which is coming up in late July. And this meeting, I think, will be well attended because we've invited NCDX, the Northern California DX Club, and we're also going to invite Motherlode and Redexa. So since it's a sort of a DXing / contesting meeting. And there's the website if you want to learn more about it. It's a fascinating program and you learn a lot about a lot of islands you never heard of. Okay, and then the August meeting after that, the 15th, we're going to have a presentation by Dean, N6DE, on the California QSO party, and also possibly some more presentations that we're still working out. And then finally, in September, we've decided, late breaking news, that we're going to have this be our first in-person meeting, if all goes well and there's no massive new epidemic or something. And it'll be an in-person picnic at N6RO on September 18th. And because of this news, I mentioned that the budget was preliminary. The reason that it's preliminary is that the addition of this and some changes in the cost that we've discovered are going to require us to rejigger a little bit the budget, but we're required to present it. So I'm going to turn it over to Stefan now, who's going to discuss the budget, which I'm showing.
Hi, Stefan, F6SA here, the new treasurer. And on your screens is the new budget, which is pretty similar to the last one. Member dues, estimated 4,515 donations from the Amazon program, about $100 like the last year. The jug ads, we have 2 sponsors, about 600. KB plug income, 600. CQP plugs, 750. Total income about $8,565. The other part, expenses. Everything is rising this year. Nothing's like the last one. So we're kind of in tight spot. Awards, the NCCC sponsored plugs about 800. Awards for to the NCCC members, 2,000. CQP plugs, 250. CQP promotion, that's for some advertising and web emailing lists. Other CQP expenses, like expects about $100, and the big CQP wine shipping, which is expected to be a little bit less than the last year, because we owe where all the wine was sent, some will be distributed. Then NCCC corporate insurance, 200. ID related expenses for all the great things we have, like the Zoom meetings and domain names, member planet fee, member planet dues and fees. We have also the PayPal fees, which are
What is the difference between member planet and member planet fee?
Member planet is the whole thing, the member. I'm not that familiar, I'm new here. Maybe some of the guys who manage this we explain, but that's the member planet whole service. And the member planet fees are added just like the PayPal fees on the financial transaction. We pay dues through those things, but through the member planet, we transfer money via PayPal too. So those fees are for that.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, PayPal wants to grab something from every transaction. Other miscellaneous fees were for some small things were the last budget, and I just put them again because they will probably come too. Member speaker compensation, 240, that's usually is coming up if we start in-person meetings in some venues. That's the usually that's the meal to the guest. And we have total expenses 8,190. With this will give you a little room, about $375. We balance the budget, so we have some wiggle room on this. And that's kind of all from me as a new treasurer.
Microphone's off, Dave.
Sorry about that. I just said if anybody disagrees with approving the budget, speak up.
Well, are there any questions?
How much? I was asking, how much did we pay for this Getty image I see? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. Okay, nothing heard. So I'm gonna turn it over to, oops, wrong slide, sorry. Find the right presentation here.
David, we're going to talk about the picnic.
I did mention it.
In terms of the cost.
I just was going to say, I mean, I'm not going to go into detail, but just that it looks like the costs have gone up substantially, which is why we couldn't do this as a final budget. So I want to move along here. So I'm going to turn it over to AE6Y.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And I guess for the record, we should, the bylaws require the budget be approved by 2/3 of the members. So I assume it's approved by acclamation then, I think, for the record, just to say it. So I have a brief report. I want to talk a little bit about last weekend's contest, and then talk about some of our successes, mainly in sweepstakes, which have been reported in the recent QSTs. And then we have a chart of upcoming contests. Go ahead, next slide.
Sorry. Okay.
Are you running these, Dave?
Yeah, I just.
All right.
There we go.
Okay, we are, no, that's the last page.
I don't know why I jumped there.
All right. So WPXCW, it was interesting. I was down in Aruba at P49Y. As far as I'm concerned, we had great conditions on 40 through 40, 20, and 15 in Aruba. And I gather from reading everybody's 3830 reports that 15 generally was better the further south you are. The people who are up in the Northwest, for example, had very limited 15-meter openings. And further south in the US or in the Caribbean, it was a very good band. There appeared to be great participation, really a lot of people on. And I was struck by the fact that there were a lot of club members. There were lots of interesting call signs from NCCC members. A lot of people got behind it and had some really good participation, which I think was excellent. Actually, on Aruba, we had a 10-meter opening too. I was in the classic category, which is 24 hours. So I actually listened a little bit Sunday morning local time, and there was a 10-meter opening. And John Crivelli, Papa 44 Whiskey, was working in that opening, but he was working mainly East Coast, and the rate didn't seem to be very good. And part of me really wanted to get on 10 just so I could say I was on 10. And it's, this is running 10 meters is always fun because it's quiet and there isn't, you don't worry about people stealing your frequency the way you do on 40. But I didn't because the rate seemed to be low. It seemed to be a limited north-south opening, but it did exist. And that's a good sign for us in the future, I think. Thinking ahead to 2022, the way this club last won WPX as a club thing was, I think, in 2010. And at that time, roughly half our score came from DXpeditions and half came from local people. And the local scores, many of them were multi-ops, because the way WPX works, of course, with the scoring system, if you run a multi-op, you're likely to increase your score more than, let's say 2 guys do a multi-single. They're likely to have a score that's much better than 2 guys operating separately in single op. That's not true of all contests. It's not true in CQP. It's not true in sweepstakes, et cetera. But it is true in WPX. And so for 2022, assuming we're going to make a focus on that, we really should plan in advance to optimize multi-op strategy and hope we can do more traveling as well. There was a controversial rules change this year, which eliminated the unassisted category. If you follow the comments on 3830, there's a lot of griping about that. I'm not sure what I think about it. AA3B, who's I guess the contest chairman now, is a master of assisted operating. He does that in the CWTs every week and wins most of them. So I don't know if that was a personal idea of his or whether there was widespread support for it, or whether the idea was, since many people operate assisted anyway, this will increase participation. But I don't want to have a long discussion because we got to do a brief report, but I was wondering if anybody else wanted to comment about how the contests seem to be from their operation here. For example, Bob, N6TV, you were on in a big way. N6RO group was, I know AJ6V was on. Does anybody have any comments they want to make about the weekend?
Yeah,
This is AJ6V. I thought that conditions were generally worse than they were last year, but they got progressively better as the contest wore into Saturday and Sunday.
Bob, you have any comments?
Well, I did 24 hours because I wanted to operate unassisted and be competitive in something. So I operated less than usual because of the rule change.
Are you against the rule change if you had your druthers?
Yes.
Yeah, I am too. Although I think what it did, interestingly, because I actually really like the classic category. I like the 24 hours myself.
I like the one radio
for
for
a change. Forced more people into that category, just the way you said, because it's, if you want to operate unassisted, the classic category is clearly an unassisted category. That makes sense.
I also enjoyed using one radio for a change, and
it's comforting. Yeah, it's kind of comforting to have one radio and not have a whole lot of cabling and not worry about interference and so on. But anyway, I guess we'll see what happens. What happens with it next year. But as I said, I can see how, as a major contest focus for 2022, we really can design our operations for it. You know, we won this contest on the club level in, I think, 2001, 2002. There's several years, as well as 2010. We haven't done so well recently, but I think with some effort we could.
Hey, Andy.
Okay, and speaking of club things,
Andy?
let's go to, yeah.
Really
go ahead.
quick, I wanted to comment because the N6RO team had a meeting on Thursday night, and we collectively agreed that this contest actually went pretty well. We felt that although there were certain areas of the contest that had less than stellar propagation, that in general, overall, that it was quite good. I operated 15 meters. I made with Dennis K7 with Dennis K7 oh, doggone it. GK, yeah.
K7 GK.
Sorry, I've been working 14 hours a day. K7 GK, and we did nearly 1,000 QSOs on 15 meters.
That's fantastic.
So,
Yeah,
and we were reaching into the African continent and into Europe on 15. So, I think overall it really went pretty well. So I just wanted to chime in, and I think that the rest of the guys kind of felt the same way.
That's great. Thanks. I appreciate that. My personal calibration for operating this contest from Aruba is that when the sunspots are really good from that location, I make about 50% European contests. There's a huge amount of European participation in this one. So about 50% of my QSOs are with Europe. At the bottom of the sunspot cycle, it's about 15%. And last weekend, it was 34%. So, which is actually enough to make it a lot of fun and interesting and open up lots of European prefixes. So I think the propagation is kind of somewhere in between. But I appreciate that, Chris. Let's go on to the next slide, David. Okay, QST recently published results for both sweepstakes, phone, and CW. This slide talks about the club scores, which are really interesting. Medium club, MLDXCC, of course, this was not an NCCC focus contest, and we finished last in the unlimited club category among 8 clubs. But that's because MLDXCC did so well with 48 logs in the medium category, and they were way ahead of the Southern California Contest Club, which was great work. And then also PL259 did a big win in the local club category, and Redexa actually came in 3rd place as well. Interestingly, and this is something we might think about trying to do, and that is, if we added up the scores for all those 4 clubs, we'd have 10 million points and be in 2nd place behind PVRC. And if we ought to think about whether, probably not for this year, but for 2022, we want to really put a push and say to MLDXCC, PL259, Redexa, hey, let's all pool our scores for NCCC and really go for it. We've done this in the past. I don't know if you can see this. This is a hat I found in my closet. It says AE6Y. It says 1994 sweepstakes team. And it says 100K CW, 100K phone. And I look back in my logs, because I didn't really remember this, but I in fact had 270K points in both modes. And I think that's what we were pushing that year. We were giving awards, we were incentivizing people. So this would obviously require the participation of these other clubs who have been going and doing very well on their own.
Hey,
But I think
Andy,
it's something worth thinking about. Yeah.
Andy, what was the difference between the sum of the 4 clubs and PVRC? What was the
Well,
difference
it's
between
another
that?
6 million points.
6 million points. Okay.
Yeah, on the other hand, well, PVRC's average log was 61K. They had 265 logs, and the average log was 61,000 points. MLDXCC's average log was 100K. PL259's average log was 154K. So if we wanted to get 16 million points, you know, it's something that's probably achievable. Frankly, we would have had 10 million here, and that's without pushing that. So in any event, it's worth thinking about. They did a very nice job, but they're as a participation thing, they obviously did a great job. We can't, but the second place, however, was SMC at 7.5 million. So it was a huge gap. PVRC was way ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, Andy, I think it's, we haven't focused on sweepstakes actually for a long time. I think if we made a big, and we haven't really been pushing it. So if the NCCC pushed it, we could bump our scores up. But right now, this year, I think it's premature. For 2022, maybe. The thing at a big station, I operate a big station, I can make about the same score no matter what. But for our smaller stations, it's really important to have these high band openings reliably, 15 and maybe even 10 meters. And then we can get a lot of more small stations on the air to really start bumping our score up. But with the way propagation from the West Coast is right now, I really don't see how we could win. So
I think that's a good point, Matt.
Sorry, I need to jump in here. We really need to move this along because Randy has an engagement later, so we need to kind of speed things up a little. So I think maybe we could save. I suggest we save the discussion for after the meeting. Then we'll leave the Zoom open. We can go into this stuff in detail.
Okay. I think you raise a good point though, Matt. And you know, sweepstakes on the East Coast is often an 80 and 40 meter contest, and here it's a high band contest. Okay, let's go forward quickly. Next slide. These are the results from sweepstakes phone. I'm not going to read them off, but these are club members who won a whole lot of categories in the Pacific Division. And I should add, by the way, that KA6BIM won the single op United or unlimited high power in the Northwestern Division as well. Next slide. Sweepstakes CW. These are similar scores from club members who have dominated the Pacific Division in the sweepstakes. Next slide. In the ARRL VHF, a contest that I know very little about, but at least K6MI and Russ K6KLY were winners in the Pacific Division. And then the final slide is upcoming contests. And we're missing the Kentucky QSO party, which is on until 7 p.m. tonight for anyone who's interested. Some other contests that are interesting for the club, the VHF contest coming up, All Asia CW, I think Bob is going to talk about. And you can see the others. Field Day, of course, RAC, Canada Day, and then the IARU, which is a contest of an interesting DX contest in itself. Okay, so that concludes my report.
Oops. Okay, let me stop sharing my screen for a second. Oops. Sorry, 1 second.
If we have a minute, can I go back to one of the earlier points that Andy was discussing, which is people's comments about the WPX contest. I would really appreciate if our distinguished guest, who's the former WPX manager, aired his opinion about the elimination of the unassisted category. Would it be too much to ask for now?
Excellent thought.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I wasn't sure if my micro, every time I use this computer to do meetings, I'm never sure if I'm wired up right or not. So I have to say I was in favor of it. Bud did not take this decision in a vacuum, and it wasn't because it was his personal preference or anything. I think the thing you have to realize about WPX is, unlike all the other contests, net multipliers are not the same criticality or value that they are in something like the worldwide. So it's really pretty much a rate contest anyway. And if you graph things out, the guy who makes the most QSOs inevitably has the most multipliers, and the scores are exponential. So the more Qs you make, the bigger you are ahead of all the other guys. So adding the cluster did compress or eliminated categories, but it really pushed everybody into competing against each other. And I know I operated with the cluster this last weekend. Conditions were great, but I still spent most of the time running. And then every once in a while I would go run around and chase spots. But if I'd been serious in the contest, I'd have been CQing most of the time anyway. So I don't think it's as big a deal personally as some people do. But in the end, it was a decision that's made. I can tell you that we're about to have a record number of logs come in for CW, so I don't think it impacted things negatively in any way. And there's nothing like great conditions to make the contest more fun, no matter what the rules are. And they were definitely great this last weekend.
Those are all fair comments. Thanks, Randy.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Randy. I'm going to turn it over to N6TV.
Have you disabled screen sharing?
Yeah, I have. I'll hook you up here, Bob. Give me a second. You're good to go. Sorry about that.
Okay, this is a new trick I've learned recently, and that is I always wanted to straighten out my serial ports. I couldn't figure out how to get the label on each serial port, so I knew what was connected to each. And so this is kind of the end result, and I'll show you how I managed to get it. I'm lucky enough to have two K4s in the shack right now. One's a field test unit, and two KPA 1500s. They all have COM ports. You guys probably have serial similar issues to this. The one at the bottom I haven't labeled yet. That's a Morty RIDI keying device. So I was trying to figure out how to label these, and a guy on one of my talks said, hey, no, you can label those too. It's in the registry. So I went hunting around and I found it on the next slide. I'm trying to get there. There we go. It's the first step is you go into the device manager, right click on the serial port you want to name, and you go properties and then details. And then on the details tab here, there's this property list. It's a very long drop down list of options, but the one you're interested in is device instance path. That gives you kind of the key to what you're going to look for in the registry. And you can just tap in a shortcut for any drop-down list in Windows. If it's a long list, you just type the first letter of anything you're looking for, and it'll jump right to that part of the list. You don't have to go scrolling with the mouse. So you just tap the D once in this case, and you get the device instance path. And see there, it says FTDI bus, and then some long numbers and stuff. And that indicates what you're looking for in the registry. So then you open up the Windows registry editor. If you're uncomfortable doing that, because you can screw up your system, I'll be happy to help you do it. And you're going to navigate to this key, and you will find that under the enum subkey, there's that FTDI bus right here with the blue arrow. I guess I can do this. So it says FTDI bus there, and then that long string is the rest of it. And right over here, it says friendly name, and that's where it says USB serial port COM3. So you just right click on that and modify it. So it said USB serial port COM3, and so I just changed it to say that's my K4 serial number 73. Thank you, Elecraft. And then click OK, and then it will show up in your device manager list as shown on this slide. that is the end of my tech tip for the day.
Okay, thanks a lot. Then if you could put those slides up somewhere in case somebody didn't memorize the registry tags.
Yeah, sure. It is included as part of a longer presentation on my QRZ.com page. In the presentation section on my QRZ.com page, the top one on the list is the link to those slides and others.
Hey, Bob, Windows often moves the ports around. Does doing it this way through the registry keep those names?
Well, sad to say, Windows shouldn't move the COM ports around unless you moved a cable from one USB port to another or uninstalled the device and reinstalled it. Just unplugging the cable and plugging it back in, it shouldn't renumber it, although I have occasionally seen Windows renumber things. Unfortunately, whenever a serial port gets renumbered, the name goes back to the default. You have to go back and repeat the procedure. But it's easy enough to figure out what device is what COM port. Just unplug the cable, see what disappears.
Right. Okay, well, moving along, we now have Bob, K3EST, is going to talk a bit about the upcoming All Asia contest.
Thanks, David. Yes, I'll give it a little short scenario of the All Asian contest, which is coming up in a few weeks. June 19th and 20th. Next slide. Essentially, the exchange in the contest, as everybody probably knows, is the age. What you may not know is you can make any age up you want. Essentially, just something that's easy to send is what I do.
Not fair. Not fair.
I don't. If I said my real age, I'll have to take out another life insurance policy or something. So the YL00, and if you're a multi, you can take the average of your ages. It actually says that in the rules, or you can just choose any age you want, but just don't change the age during the contest, and you'll be okay. Next slide.
What if your birthday's that weekend? Just kidding.
Yeah, it's another problem. So the multipliers are the number of Asian prefixes, and so that, like, for example, J1, JF9, UW0 would be different multipliers on each band. And essentially, most of the guys you're going to work in the contest are Japan stations. And as we'll see in the next couple of slides, I'll give you another example of when the bands are open to various parts of Asia, and finally a summary. Okay, next slide. The vast majority of your contacts are going to be in Japan, followed by China and Asiatic Russia, maybe 80% in China and Japan, and then the rest. And there's a little scenario, a little summary of the Japanese situation. You can see that there are 150 prefixes in Japan. And I give you some examples. As you probably all know, JH, and JR were issued in all call areas. So no matter what the number is, they all exist in those three prefixes. And then I go down a bit further. You can see there's nothing in those prefixes beyond those numbers that are given there. So if you work at like a JF, a JG9, it's not a real call. So basically, ask for the call again. 7Js are non-Japanese stations in Japan, and JDs are, as you probably know, with the other DXCC countries. And then there's the 7K through 7N, 1 through 4, which are all in the J1 area. Next slide. And here's some examples of Asiatic Russia, just for your own edification. Essentially, you can look at that and see where the opening band, where the band is actually open. Sometimes it's open to zone 19, obviously from here almost all the time, but further west, it's more difficult. And if you have a good opening, you get all the way over to zone 17. But if you look at these letters, you can see where each one of the Russians that you do work, Asiatic Russians, is actually located, and by the suffix. Next slide. And these are the Chinese suffixes, and you can see them there also. Each one, prefixes, and each one counts as a different multiplier. You may or may not know that BY3, G through L as the suffix are all in zone 23. Center is Inner Mongolia is what it boils down to. And all the J, if you work at BY9 or 0 or that BY3 area, that's an easy way to get a zone 23 if you're interested in some other concepts like the CQWW. Next slide. So the following slide shows you some band openings, which I've gone through for the last 2 years with K3ST as a multi, and summarize it for you so you can choose when to be on if you go part-time or full-time. So next slide. So this is 80 and 160, and you can see where two areas are on and when the band is actually open. So if you want to work JAs, you can get on at those times to try to maximize your contacts into that area, especially on 80. Next slide.
And I just want to mention those are Zulu times.
Yeah, those are Zulu times. And 7 megahertz is there. You can see that. 40. And as before, it's you'd be surprised, you know, like in other times, it's but this is summertime conditions, so almost all the JAs are in the morning on 40 meters, as you might expect. And if you look at those other areas, Southeast Asia and VR, BY, and UA9, I give them a summarized so you can figure out when to maximize your score into those areas. Next slide. 20 meters, just like it was in the WPX, is open at night to JAs. You can see that, and it maximizes in the early morning. And the other areas you can see there, and where to be on at the right time to get the prefixes and the biggest score you can. If you go on part-time, you can look at these slides and figure out when to maximize your and have the most fun to get on. And although these slides are from K3ST operating at N6RO and from a big station, if you look at the center of the plate of each slide where the maximums are, a very small station can really do quite well in those hours. So at the tails is when the big stations can, the hours, so that's sort of like a filter. At the tails, the big station is going to have a big advantage. Next slide. So this is 21, which is, as you can see, wasn't given much, but you can sort of see when the openings were. Even 10 meters was open last couple of years, and you can see that when to try to get on there and work those stations. They're usually typically in the late afternoon and the morning, up to the morning, or up to midnight even. And then next slide. So this is a summary of the JA-HL openings on each band, as you can see, and you can then move between bands and try to figure out how to maximize your score. Have a lot of fun by working guys at the right time. No sense wasting your time during the day, during the OAsian. Essentially, it's almost all entirely a nighttime band contest. Next slide. There's a UA9 opening and UA0. And that also includes United Norway if they usually come in at about the same time as the UA9 and UA0. Late deep UA0s come in. Next slide. And here's a summary of all the bands together. And I put them in red so you can see where the maximum times to be on and try to maximize your score. If you get on at those times, you can do quite well by working guys. And calling CQ, you can work at quite a few stations. A lot of stations, JAs especially, are not calling CQ. They're going around calling people. So you can work quite a few guys if you get on at those times. Okay, next slide. So that's my little talk on the OAsian. I'll put this on the club reflector so you can get an idea when to get on and everything, but have a lot of fun and good luck to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, now moving right along here. I want to introduce Randy. First of all, a lot of you know him, of course, but for those who don't, I also like to thank him for agreeing to do this talk. Usually we buy you lunch and pay for your gas, but might have taken you too long to drive out here. So again, many thanks for agreeing to do this, and sorry you had to wait a bit. I want to, for those who don't know Randy, in his QRZ page, he says he's a master of the understatement. It says here, I am very active in contests and make a lot of QSOs. Well, how many? Well, as of October 12th, 2020, which is a long time ago, he was 650,000. So sure he's well on his way to 1 million. And then in the ARL-DX sideband contest in his 3830, we were paying a lot of attention to that because I was operating at K1AR. So anyway, he said this was a just for fun effort. Started late, watched some TV, chased cluster pileups, only used one radio, and then with that he possibly won the single op unassisted high power. So He's a great contester, as many of you know. He's a frequent presenter at the Contest University, etc. I've watched several of those, and he was CQ Contest Hall of Fame inductee in 2008. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Randy.
All right, thanks a lot. It helps in these ARL contests to live in New England, though, so you can watch some TV and still win the contest. So let's see. For me to share my screen, I just have to stop your sharing. I'm going to go to screen 1 here. Okay, tell me when you can see my slides.
That looks like it.
All right, good deal. So thank you for having me. We're having an absolutely gorgeous day here in New England. So I was telling David in the private chat, it's like, wow, I'm sorry I signed up for a Saturday afternoon time. It's gorgeous out there. Should have signed up for one of the meetings where I'd be up at midnight or something. But anyway, I'm happy to be here. This presentation is something that is a talk on something I've never done before. So I'll be interested to hear your comments and questions as we go along. Feel free to stop me and ask questions. If it's something I'm going to cover later, I'll let you know. But what we're going to talk about today is what happens to your contest log after you submit it. And we'll go through all the steps and give you some idea of what some of the work that goes on in the background. David's already introduced me, but I've been a ham since 1973. I think I got my license in June. I did field day a couple of weeks later and got to work lots of people. And I've been a contest addict ever since. I just fell in love with it. And my parents kept thinking some other hobby was going to take over. And here I am all these years later, and I'm still doing the same thing. So it's great. I love it. Before we begin, though, I have to say something. I'm going to give a very high level view of how the log checking works. And there'll be a lot of this really around the mechanics and so on, less about some of the details about how we do things. I think you can assume every contest does something similar. I know the ARL contests have a similar methodology, although maybe different numbers of people and so on. But in the end, these are my personal opinions based on working on log checking. So I almost should turn off the recording for this, but so don't use any of these in trying to convince the contest director to do something different in the future. But the goal here is just to give you an idea of what the log checking process is all about. So when you think about it, it's pretty simple. You create your log during the contest and you send it off to the sponsor, and the results magically appear, right? How hard can this be? Now, the thing you have to realize in the case of the worldwide is 9,000 other people did the same thing. So we have to deal with a lot of logs. And so we end up with this kind of black box in the middle of this process. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And probably the biggest FAQ from people is just, why does this take so long? Why does it take so long to get from sending in logs until we have contest results? And I'll try to answer that a little bit. So when I first worked on the CQ Worldwide, Bob Cox was still running things, and it was very different than it is today. So you would do the contest and you would create your contest log. You can see that over here on the left. Hopefully you can see my, here, I'll see if I can turn on some kind of mouse selector. Anyway, so you have your contest log and you get it all printed out and everything. You would have to take it to the mailbox, put it in the mailbox and mail it to the contest sponsor. So in the case of CQ, you'd mail it to CQ on Long Island. They would wait until they had a whole bunch of them in a box, and then they would send them to K3EST. So we've already got 2 mailing delays in here. And remember, some of these logs are coming from a long way away, so there might be multiple shipments and so on, but it would take a long period of time. And then once Bob got them, he turned around and sorted them all into different categories, and he sent them off to the members of the contest committee, also by mail. So I remember getting this big box, UPS or whatever it was at the time, and had a whole bunch of multi-single logs in it, and they were all handwritten paper logs. So the contest committee each member had a certain number of logs they had to deal with, and they would look through them and check them as best they could and cross-check and talk about things that we were seeing that maybe didn't look right, that kind of stuff. But you can imagine this is all being done really pre-internet. So it just was a very manual process, took a long time. And in the end, we would have edited the scores of, or fixed all the summary sheets or whatever that came in, and we would send it back to Bob. And it was Bob's job to get them all typed up into some form for CQ, and then do the write-ups and the tables. And it's kind of mind-boggling now to think of all the typing that had to go on to get from these paper logs to where it could be sent to CQ. And then think about it in CQ, they had to turn around and type a lot of this again to get it into the scores in the magazines. So I think one of the reasons that we see things like 8,000 and 9,000 entries now compared to what it was 20 years ago or 25 years ago is that it's so much easier now. But anyway, once the sponsor has it and they do all of their pre-processing work and get the write-up and everything set and all the ads put around it and so on, they send it off to the printer. The magazine comes out, once again, goes in the mail, and you finally, almost a year later, whatever it was, 10 months later, you get the magazine. And so the challenge, and then the certificates were all separate process that happen more or less separately, is the same thing as with trophies and plaques. Anyway, think about that. It took weeks to get your log to the sponsor, weeks to get it to K3ST or whoever the contest manager was, took more weeks to get it to the committee, took the committee a few months to grind on everything and try to get the scores put together, and back to Bob where he could spend a week or two packaging everything back up to CQ and getting it to them. And then it took them a little while to get through the magazine publishing process, and then more time. So this whole thing just took a long time. And it, like I said, it's mind-boggling to me just how much work this was. So the new way. Today, what happens is you have your logs. We start in the same place. You've generated your log, except now it's on computer disk instead of on paper. And you go to the contest website, and there's a page there where you can upload your log. So I've written minutes here, but it really it only takes seconds. It's usually not a hard job. So now your logs get accepted by the website. The website, in turn, it loads your log into a Git repository. So if you don't know what Git is, don't worry about it. But this is something that's used by software developers for storing source code. Turns out to work fantastically for storing contest logs as well. And so we automatically put the logs into a repository, and then we have log checking software that pulls the logs out of the repository and runs, and then generates a whole set of results onto a set of web pages, onto another website, a log checking website. And we set it up so that the log checking software is running every 4 or 6 hours. And so just as soon as the contest is over, we're running every 4 hours. We're just running the logs, and we're generating these reports. The contest committee members now do two things. They look at the log checking website to see these reports, so they can see how the scores are coming in. And there's various reports, which I'll show you in a minute, about various issues that need to be looked into and so on. And then they're interacting with the Git repository to make changes in various data and configuration files. And so as those files change, the log checking software picks them up in the next run and presents everything. So really, we're in this cycle where every 4 hours, we've got the whole contest rechecked and new output files generated. Then, of course, we can run them manually. So I would find when I would get towards the end, when we're really trying to do the final, I might be running the thing every 5 minutes. It'd be like, run, make some changes, run it some more. Okay, is everything fine? And then move on. So once we're finally to the end, the scores are all generated. It turns out the scores are all generated by the log checking software. So it ends up being a file. The contest manager goes and gets the file. He adds it to, adds the write-up and a few of the extra tables like plaques and so on. He gets those to the magazine electronically, so they're not having to retype things. And then the magazine is able to, they still take months because they still have a certain amount of lead time, about 4 to 6 weeks from when they've got the material until they actually get to the publication date. And over the last couple of years, CQ has been a little late in mailing magazines. So they've been very good at getting the online magazine out on the day that it's supposed to be, but sometimes the printed magazines take a little bit longer. But you can see here that really we're talking about minutes, seconds, weeks, really just to grind through some of the log checking here. And really our big deadline our big issue, it remains just the magazine printing schedule. And the way they set up the editorial calendar for the year, there's really not a way to speed this up. But we've at least got it to the point now that the CQ Worldwide in October ends up having the results in April instead of September or whatever it was before. And then another thing that happens on the day the magazine releases, the contest manager or whoever is doing the work takes these output files from our log checking software and loads them into the contest website's database. And as soon as that database goes live, we automatically get all the certificates and all the score listings and everything. So it's a completely different world than it was before. And it's the only way this can work these days with the volumes of things. I know when I started doing the WPX in 2008, you could still kind of do everything in Excel where you were scrolling through things, but we were only getting about 3,000 logs. And then by the time there's some place around 5,000 where it just becomes impractical to do things manually anymore. It just all has to be automatic. So the key thing here is the log checking software. It's doing all of the work. Yes, the people are checking things, and I'll explain why or what the people are doing, but this software does everything. And the goal of the software is to output everything in a form that really the contest manager just has to do the write-up and send it on to CQ, and we're done. So the steps of the log checking process are pretty straightforward. Obviously, we've got to gather all the logs in and get them stored in the repository. And the 5-day deadline, I know was a big shock for people when we went from kind of 2 months to 5 days. It was partly to try to get rid of some of the log washing and log cleaning that was going on, but it was also it also was made possible by electronic logs and the fact that people had pretty much gotten the idea of electronic logs. They just didn't like the idea that they had to do them right away. Well, here we are 10 years later, and now nobody thinks, you look at the log receipts, we get 80% of the logs in the first 24 hours after the contest. So people have really gotten the idea. You do the contest, you make your file, you send it in, and you're done. You don't have to worry about it anymore. And think about it in the past, in the paper log days, you would spend days avoiding doing anything, and then you'd sit down and go, okay, I have to dupe this log and make it readable and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I digress. So we gather up and store the logs. There is a cleaning process. I'll talk a little bit about this, but it makes sense. Anytime you're doing computer work, especially any kind of large data sets like this, the value of the output's only as good as the input. There's log checking step that goes on. Then in the case of the CQ contest, there's an investigations step, which takes a little bit of time. And then of course we get to the final results. So let's talk about each of these. A couple of fundamentals before we get started. The way the system is built, it's pretty fundamental that there's only one log per call sign. So we often get people asking, can I work 2 single bands using 1 call sign? And the answer is no. And the reason for that is each log we're using the call sign as the identifier for the log. So every time we get a log submitted through the web page, it overwrites any previous log we got with that same call sign. So it would be a major change for both us and the ARL to make this different. So for now, I don't see this changing. And this becomes really great when we look at some of the automation that's going on, because I've got logs coming in, and some people may submit their log 3 or 4 times before they get everything figured out or get it right. But as we're dumping it into the repository, it just becomes an update for the previous log that have been submitted for that call sign. We do timestamp every log on arrival, and that timestamp is added into the log. So we know when a log came in, or we know when, and we're always working on the last log. So, you know, with the 5-day deadline, any timestamp after the 5 days is considered a late log. Still shows up in the results, but it's no longer eligible for certificates and trophies or plaques. And the biggest mistake you can make is submit your log on time and then see something a few weeks later where you go, oh, I want to make a change, and submit your log again, because it goes from being on time to being late. And then you lose out on whatever you might have won. One of the things, because of the Git repository, we do end up with a record of every log. So if somebody goes in and changes the log, and there are some reasons we'll talk about later on about why that may happen, we can come back and tell you everything. We can tell you every time a log that got submitted, when, and then we can tell you anytime a log got edited or changed or whatever. I do a lot of work changing club names and so on. So we've got all of this, and we have had cases where people came back and said, oh, well, you must have messed up our log because our score isn't what we thought it would be. And we can say, nope, we can tell you everything about the travel of this log from when we got it to when the results came out. So it's quite an incredible process, and we have to give N5KO Trey a lot of credit, because he really came up with it at the beginning, and we just keep building onto it. So step one of your log delivery process is through the web upload. This is a web page. All the CQ contests have essentially the same page, just we look for different things depending on what the log is. But the main thing when we get a login is it a log file? In other words, does it start with Cabrillo, or start of log really? Is it version 2 or 3? And the reason that's important is because the categories are specified differently. They end up in the same place. So the first thing we do when we get a 2.0 log is convert it into a 3.0 log. You know, it doesn't really matter. But the key thing here is, does it have the information that we have to have? Does it have a call sign, an entry category, an email? You can see these things on the right over here. This is the one from the CQ this week. And then we go through and make sure that, okay, is there any other header information that is in the correct format? And then we go through all the QSO lines and make sure, are they correctly formatted? In other words, do they have the right number of pieces of information, right mode, the dates within the contest period, all that kind of stuff? And is there an end of log line at the end? And if all of that stuff is good, then as soon as you get past this first page, we'll tell you, okay, your log's ready to submit. Just hit the submit button and you're done. If there are mistakes or errors that we've identified, and the most common one is somebody's missing, like they have a QSO line where there's a missing number or a missing zone or something like that. So we'll throw an error on that and show them a dialog with their box with their log in it, and they can go down and correct it. And most people figure that out. I see a few people do occasionally abandon the process at this point because they just don't understand the messages or what they're supposed to do. And so we can monitor the logs that have come in and been abandoned in the background. And sometimes it's pretty easy for us to fix them and go ahead and finish the submission process for people. But the goal here in the web upload, and the reason we went to this away from the old email method, was we were spending so much time fixing logs that we had gotten the email had sent back that there were problems, and then the user or the participant never resubmitted their log. So it just meant, okay, we had to fix it. So the whole idea here is, instead of us spending time figuring out what you thought you put in your log, it's like, well, fix it yourself, and then we don't have to worry about it. So this has turned out to be a really good thing. One thing I did run into the other day, in CQ, we're trying to give you the tools to really see what has been entered and how it's been interpreted. And if there's something that needs to be fixed, you can just fix it right in the page. I noticed with the ARL upload, it's pretty much pass fail. You either everything is correct and you're good, or if you've got any mistake, it throws an error and tells you to fix it and upload again. So they make you do it out of band. We do it in the page. In the end, the net's the same. That we both want quality, clean, at least format, program, computer clean logs coming in. So when the log upload is complete, we store it in the Git repository. We send in an email acknowledgement to the entrant. you may have noticed there's a place, because people have the ability to edit their log as they go along, there's a checkbox where you can say, hey, send me a copy of my log along with the acknowledgement. And then we show it in the logs received. We do some post-processing of the Git repository stuff on a batch basis. So that's why the logs don't show up in logs received instantaneously. There may be up to 20-minute delay before they show up there, but they will show up. Now, one of the things we ran into is a lot of people don't know how to make a Cabrillo file or use a logger that doesn't know how to make one. And so they have ADIF files. And so I wrote an ADIF converter, and there's one of those on each of the websites. And I'm surprised often how many people use N1MM, make an ADIF file, go to the ADIF file converter, convert their log, and then go from the converter, then you go straight into the Cabrillo checker or the log checker that we saw before. And I think it's just a case of these guys all know how to export ADIF files to get it into Logbook of the World or into some other logger, that kind of thing. And so to them, that is the output from their logging software. And so that's just where they start. This is fine, except the problem is a lot of general purpose loggers don't always log all the information that we need, or people don't record it in the place that matches up. So when we're doing ADIF conversions, we have to expect the user to, okay, you have to tell us what ADIF field you put the received exchange in or the sent exchange in. And sometimes they just don't have it. And so we end up getting a lot of ADIF logs that either have to be check logs because they have no exchange information, or people submit, but they pick the wrong field. So then we have to go back and find it. The good news about these web uploaders is we keep all the files that get uploaded, so we can always go back and try to help people, unwind things if they made a mistake. But if you can make a Cabrillo file, do that. It just makes everything so much easier for you and ultimately for us. So at the beating heart of this whole system is this custom log checking software. And this was written by Ken, K1EA, the same guy who made CT many years ago. And Ken has been working on this forever. He continuously makes improvements. Sometimes he makes bugs too, but they're always in the context of improvement. So we've figured them out and keep moving. But he has done a fantastic job. Almost everything that you could run into in log checking of large volumes of logs over time, he's written something to help us figure it out or help the program do more and more of the work. It's really fantastic. And he's got versions that run on Windows or Linux. For all the CQ worldwide and WPX log checking, we do everything in Linux. For the RIDI contest, Ed W0YK does everything on a local Windows machine, but the net is the same. So the way this works is the log checking software has certain configuration files that tell it, okay, this is a worldwide contest, or this is the WPX, and this is CW, and these are the dates, kind of baseline stuff that LC needs to know to be able to do the log checking. Then, of course, we need the country file. Country is cty.dat, and we get this from 81C. He makes a special version for us that's just got the information that we need. And he does a fantastic, amazing work on this, keeping it up to date all the time. So when we get ready to do a new contest, we go grab the latest cty.dat file and throw it in the folder. And then there's a number of data files that the log checkers create and manipulate. And I'll show you some of those, again, to help LC know what to do. And then we've got all the logs that we pull in. So the software really goes to the repository, gets all these various files, grinds on them for a while, and then generates two sets of output files, a bunch of report files, which tell us about various metrics that we want to keep track of or things that might be wrong. And then the results files. Okay, here's all the score listings. Here's the here's the breakdowns. Here's the top 10 boxes. It's fantastic. And Ken's goal or vision when he started writing all this was, let's get it to the point where we can, when we're done, we can take the files and ship them directly to CQ without having to do anything. Even so far as converting them into the format they need for their word processor. Here's the cool part, the most cool part of all. I I just did a run of the WPX logs yesterday, and 5,700 logs with 2.7 million QSOs, and it took 62 seconds. So think about that. We went from logs coming in through the web page to final results that could go to CQ in 62 seconds or whatever. It's pretty amazing. If only it was that easy. There's some other stuff that gets wrapped around this that we'll talk about now. So one of the things I mentioned before was this need for a cleaning step, the computer thing, garbage in, garbage out. Well, when you're reading in all these logs, you don't always get what you expect. So the biggest thing is, for example, somebody will submit their log under one call sign and then realize, oh, and we see this a lot in WPX, they'll realize, oh, that's my normal call sign. I used a special call. So then they'll submit it again under their WPX call. So now we've got two logs that are identical. One of them is meaningful and one's not. So we have to find those and get rid of the bogus ones if they don't tell us. It helps if they tell us, much easier. We also get cases where people submit their log under the wrong call sign and don't tell us or don't realize that they should used a different call. And so now we've got a log where none of the QSOs match. It's got a huge negative score. And it's like, okay, so what is this log really? And then we have to go start looking through the reverse logs and try to figure out, well, who is this? And so we do that. And so that's another reason why we might have to edit things in the repository to get the correct call sign. Sometimes we run into call signs that are not in the country file for whatever reason, or they're weird call signs that put them in a place where the country file can't interpret them correctly. So we change the cty.dat file. We sometimes get logs with missing exchange data. So we have to decide what to do with that. And what we do most of the time is if you don't have a zone or a number, we put in 00. And so the computer's happy. It's not very smart. It goes, oh, okay, there's something in this field. It's a number. I'm good. But then when it does the exchange checking, it goes, oh, this exchange doesn't match. So therefore you lose the QSO. So it's always a good idea to fill in all the exchanges if you can. We get a lot of logs. I've got another slide on this, but times are another challenge for us. We get logs of bad times and dates, especially in WPX phone, because that happens to be the weekend that Europe changes from wintertime to summertime. And so a lot of guys, their logs are all perfectly fine. And then at 2 a.m. on Sunday morning, they get off by an hour for the rest of the contest. Or actually, usually it's until they notice it. So they'll have like 4 hours that'll be off by an hour, but they don't fix that. They just send it in and then we have to deal with it. You'd be surprised how many people log QSOs on the wrong band. We see this mostly with hand-typed logs where people are logged through some other mechanism and now they're submitting it by hand. They're typing their log in and they just miss a band change or something. Club names are one of my personal pet peeves. I'll talk about that more later on. Operator call signs, people get those. It's really weird. I'll pick on Tom since he was a former NCCC member. 8P5A will send in his log with the operator as 8P5A. And so I see that and I have to go edit his log to say, no, the operator was W2SC, that kind of stuff. Another thing that people miss is the multi-ops. A lot of times they'll send their log in with no transmitter marking. So they're multi-single. We have no way of knowing which are the multiplier stations and which aren't. And so we have a couple of different mechanisms for handling that. But if we don't go take some action, those stations will get a lot of band change errors or band change violations and a big score reduction. And if we were real hard, nose guys and no tolerance and people were paying, and we were working for pay for money and the entrants were competing for money, we'd probably make them take the pain. But since this is all for fun, we try not to let people take errors that they don't have to. It's kind of a customer service thing. Like, okay, if you didn't put in your transmitter markings or you got them backwards for a while, we'll try to fix that if we can. But we're not going to try to fix your log. If we can't figure it out, too bad, but usually it's pretty obvious. So you can see there's a lot of places where the log checking team will be interacting with that repository to make small corrections in logs and so on. We don't like to correct the logs, but sometimes that's just the way to fix things.
Randy, what about pirate call signs? I think you missed that.
Yeah, I did. So pirate call signs, a good example would be all the Delta One calls. CQ has made the decision that the D1s, the Donetsk Republic or whatever their name is, are not, I don't even know how to say it. They're not real ham radio call signs, or they're not legitimate ham radio call signs. And so therefore, we just don't acknowledge them. And by marking them as pirates, even if you work them, they don't count for anything. They just become a nothing. And it's too bad. I feel bad for those guys because there's a lot of enthusiasm over there. We get 2 or 3 or 4 D1 logs from the participants every contest, and we have to mark them as pirates and put them in check logs. And so they're clearly enthusiastic contesters. They're hams just like us. But for whatever reason, they're using these D1 calls, and we just can't accept them. So they're marked out. But some other ones, like somebody logged VP2ML in a contest the other day, or in the worldwide last year. So that's clearly not a legitimate call sign. So we throw that in the pirate category too. Okay, so log checking, again, this is how LC is working. And the goal here is we want to make the log checking fair and impartial for all the entrants. And so I know when we were working with paper logs, there was often a lot of focus on, well, let's make sure we get the top scores right, and then everybody else kind of ends up with wherever they are. And it was mostly a resource and just practical thing. But now with the computer doing all the work, we check every log from top to bottom. They all get scrutinized and have reductions and so on. So to me, it's really great. You don't have this thing where you think you're a really great contester until you hit the top 10, and all of a sudden your log gets hammered. You know, on the way up through the log checking reports where your mistakes are and so on. And when we first started doing this, there were people who wrote back angry letters going, oh, you know, I feel so bad. I'm so terrible. I'm not going to enter anymore. And I feel bad for them, but it's all part of the game. And what fun is the game if you don't see the mistakes? So the goal here is to get better. So anyway, LC reads in configuration files. It reads in all the logs. It goes through each log and compares every QSO in that log with all the other logs that we have. And obviously we don't, sometimes we don't have 100% of them, but it will go through and check as many of them as it can. If it doesn't find a match, then it starts looking for, well, are there any other calls at this frequency and time that are off by 1 letter? So they have 1 letter that might be different. And then are there any calls that are off by 2? So 2 letters may have been twiddled. And we try to do a match from that. Obviously, if a call's off by 1 or off by 2, it's marked as bad. But the real brilliance here is Ken's ability to write an algorithm that can find these things. And then if we don't find a match on the same band, then we go say, well, is there a match on another band? Because this, and if we find something on another band, it's still a not in log because the 2 things don't match, but we get it in a report. So now we can go see, is this a isolated incident, or did some guy log 25 Qs in a row on the wrong band, in which case we should go fix it. And then we have another routine which actually goes and if it still can't find any matches, it'll go look at all the reverse logs and go, hey, is there anybody who has a call sign that looks like this one that was on this band at about the same time? And so that'll find us a few more, again, we're trying to figure out what busted calls are, or which calls are busted so we can appropriately score them. Once the QSO matching is done, then we check the exchange. So in CQ Worldwide, this is pretty straightforward. There's not much mystery, but in WPX, we get a lot of data to work with here. So do the exchanges match? Sometimes what we'll find is some guy will go along and everything is fine, and then all of a sudden he'll be throwing exchange busts for people. And you'll realize that his log shows all the numbers in consecutive order, but he actually skipped a couple of numbers. And we see this a lot of times when people go back and retype logs. So again, another reason for us to get in and try to straighten things out, because it's actually the log doesn't represent what the guy was saying on the air. again, from a customer service perspective, rather than let that guy have a bunch of caused busts, we try to see if we can straighten things out so everybody gets the points they deserve. Anyway, and then once we've done all this checking and we know what's valid in the log, then we go through and calculate the multipliers and the points and score the log. And then we generate the outputs for the log checkers and the score tables and so on. So sounds really easy, but there's like a bazillion years of experience in doing this various ways, some right and some wrong. One good example is like off by 1 and off by 2. It's very difficult for us to do that on 4-letter calls. So that it actually turns out the shorter the calls are more difficult to check because they don't have enough letters for us to match busts. Whereas the longer calls, it's pretty obvious when somebody makes a mistake. So I want to show you some things, and I don't think I've ever showed this publicly. So, but this is the web page that we have when we check the logs. So this, I'm going to go back to CQ Worldwide 2020 sideband because it's already out, so we're not giving anything away. And so remember, I said there were a bunch of configuration files. So they're in the Etsy directory here. So the first one is lc.dat. It tells me what the contest is, what the date is, what the name of it is, what the dates are, when the cutoff time is for certificates and so on. So LC needs that to get itself started. Then we need the country file. And so this is pretty much a country file you're used to looking at, except it's only got zones, CQ zones in it. We don't have all the other stuff in there. And then sometimes, I'll give you an example. There are always a few maritime mobiles. And so I'll end up hand adding the maritime mobiles in here so we get them in the right continent. They don't count for multipliers, but they do count for score. So that's why it does matter if they're what continent they're in. Let's see here. Give you an example. This is a file. In this case, V2ZL sent zone 2 to everybody during the contest, but he's actually in zone 5. And so we don't want people getting zone 2 credit for this guy. So by putting him in here, we're telling LC the V2ZL log has bad sent information, so don't try to use it for checking. K3RW sent zone 4, but he was in zone 3. Same thing. So this is a good example of how these config files allow the log checkers to clean up some things that we see without having to go in and edit the logs. We really don't want to edit the logs if we don't have to. Let's see, I've got another one in here. We get to the end of the contest and the director has made his decisions. And so we have a disqualify file. So again, LC will go through, does all its normal log checking stuff, and then it gets to these guys and goes, okay, all these, show them in that list at the end of the results and get them out of everything else. That's a file you do not want to be in. And then we
Randy?
talked about pirates a minute ago. So here's a, yep.
What would happen if a guy sent the wrong zone and what he sent looked like a multiplier to someone else? I'm thinking specifically about.
So it turns out, specifically about what?
1819. Some of them send the wrong zone.
Oh, yes. So we do not rely on the zones that are copied in the log to do the multipliers. We do it all off the country file. And I just opened a whole can of worms that I'm not going to explain any more than that. But suffice it to say that it's all based on the call sign. So whether the guy sends 17, 18, or 19 and he's a UA9 or 16 even, we will score him based on what his call is or based on where we know he is.
So you can
as
lose
we
the
entered it
multiplier
in the
or
country
pick up
file.
the multiplier because the station sent the wrong zone.
If he sent the wrong one, it becomes only an issue if you didn't copy what he sent.
If he sent 18,
So
and you put
if he sent 18,
in your
but
log, and it was a multiplier, but he's actually in 19, you lose the multiplier. But
that's correct.
If he sent 18 and you put it in your log and he's actually in 19, do you pick up a multiplier? Let's say he's your only 19. Do you actually get credit for 19?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes, yes.
So it can
Yeah,
cure
it's
your
actually
flu.
turns out that really complicated. What's complicated is USA guys, because they're in all kinds of zones and their call has nothing to do with where they are. So we've done a bunch of work to try to work on that as well. So anyway, I'm going to show you how long it takes to run LC. We're going to run the WPX contest right now. We just started it. So the first thing LC does is go off and get all of the logs from the new logs from the repository, what's changed. And we can see here that it read in the config file, so it knows this is the contest and what the start time is and so on. It's reading that back to us. This is a server that was purchased and is owned and operated by the Worldwide Radio Operator Foundation, WWROF. So if you ever wondered what your donations go for, this is what. So this server's dedicated to the CQ contest. So all of our websites are hosted here and we use it for the log checking. So we can see that there were 5,826 logs that were found. And now what it's doing is going through each step of the process, loading the logs, assigning the QSO pairs, checking times, making the reverse logs, checking the locations, checking against FCC data. We'll talk about that more later. Check all the multi-op band markings, you know, blah, blah, blah. Write all the files, the output files. And there you go. We just processed 5,800 logs in 63 seconds. And now what it's doing is making some zip files if you wanted to bring it down to your local machine. And then the last thing it does is go through and does a conversion to RTF, because that's what that's what CQ needs for their to load into their process word processors or their publishing system. So there you go. That to me is the most amazing thing. When you think about how hard it was, and Bob is probably over there crying in his beer now, but it was so much typing and handwork before, and now, what's that?
It was like 6 feet of paper logs.
That's right. We just ground it up in 62 seconds. So these are examples of all the results. So Etsy and logs are input folders. The output folders are all these other ones, and we're not going to go into all of them, but like RPTs are all the log checking reports for different people. But results, these are the files that LC is generating for the log checkers to look at. And I noted a few of them here. One of them is like the country.txt file. So this file, remember, this is for the worldwide. So for every country, it tells us how many people were worked in that country and what was the first QSO that was reported. Now, the first QSO is only helpful on these really low count ones because you can see what they were. There's a pretty good chance DR1A didn't work E44A, but we don't have any way to prove that he didn't, so it's in there. So there's a lot of these really low count ones that are probably bust, but you never quite know. Then there's somewhere a guy probably got on, made a few QSOs. Like let's say 3D2AG here. He made 5 QSOs in the contest. Well, if we come look at, oh, sorry, I picked the wrong one. That was EL2BG. Let's find him. EL2BG, here he is. So he made 16 QSOs in the contest. We can go look at the reverse log for him and we can see what those 16 reported QSOs were. And it's very interesting when you look at these, you can see that he got on the air for probably an hour from 1600 to 1647. Then he got on a little bit the next day for another hour. So he's on the air 2 hours and you can see the times line up, the bands line up. This is a guy who was clearly on the band, tuning around, calling people, no question. This is good. Sometimes you'll roll into one of these and the times are all over the place and the bands are all over the place. And what you've got is probably a packet bust or a spot bust. And so it's generated a huge reverse log file, but but there's not really this station on the air. So this gives you an example of how having a reverse log for every call sign that was found in a log is a really handy thing. Anyway, just to give you some idea why you want to be in a part of the country like Aruba, or part of the world like Aruba, where you're close to W's, is W's at the very bottom there, always the most worked country by far.
Wow.
Now, when we added up the EU, it's probably pretty equal, but it's there's a lot of W's. So you want to be where you can work them. But there's also a lot of QSOs with YB these days. So that's your best hope for replacing Japan. All right, anyway, let's see here. Another thing, band breakdowns. So for example, here we go, band breakdowns for the magazine. So one of the things that LC does is it goes, all right, we've got all the score, everything scored. So go get the top 10 for each category and show their band breakdowns. So again, this used to be a really hard job, painful job typing numbers in. That's why a lot of the older magazines, we'd find a mistake somewhere, miss a digit. But that's all gone now. It's all coming straight out of the computer into the file that CQ needs. Same thing is true for the line scores. So immediately when it makes the line scores, it prints them all out in the form that CQ wants them. We put some special markings in here, like the percents and the @ signs and so on. That's to tell our RTF converter what to make a bold and that kind of thing. But again, think about typing. If you had to type all this stuff in, call sign, band, score, QSOs, country or zones, countries, and do it over and over and over again, man, thank goodness we don't do that anymore. Let's see, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about here. There's a bunch of files here that tell us about logs that have time problems. We have a file that says, here's all the unique calls that were worked in the contest. So these are all the calls that ended up being counting only once. And so again, you look through this and most of the time, you know, there's nothing we can really do with this, but occasionally you see things like, okay, that's probably a bust, and you do a little research on it and you can figure it out. But let's see here, out of band. So one of the things that we do in the worldwide more, but a little bit in WPX, is we look at different stations that are logging QSOs that are out of the band out of the ham bands for them, like 985Y on 7200 is really out of the band for him. The same thing, let's see, let's find one. AB3CV here works somebody on 7109. That's out of the band. Now, one of the things you have to realize when you're doing log checking is you cannot trust any frequencies that are in logs. Some people just enter 7,000 or, you know, for 40 meters, and some people it's only 14,000. Some people, their log will show every QSO on 40 meters is on 7010, and every QSO on 20 meters is on 14,100 or whatever. So but then there's a lot of people who do log their frequencies correctly. So we can usually figure it out from the reverse log where somebody probably was, but we will not bust a QSO as being out of band unless we hear it on the SDR. So what this report does is just telling us, here are people who may have worked people out of the band. Now go look at it in the SDR and decide whether we want to bust that QSO or not. Ooh. It's not really our job to be the FCC, but it's just getting to be such a problem with the spot clicking that we felt like we had to do something.
Randy, can I ask a question? This is Andy, 86Y.
Sure.
I saw my P49Y call there a couple times, but I had an occasion in last fall, CQ Worldwide, where I worked RT4F on 40 meters, and it was very loud. I listened to the recording. There's no question. It was quite a good contact, except it was at 72.25 or something like that. And I got a nil, presumably because he scrubbed his log. And I guess the question is, what should I do as an operator when that happens? Because, as I said, there were a couple of Americans who worked me below 21,200 on 15. I just saw on the scroll you had. Should I just simply not log those, or what do you suggest?
There's no, what I suggest is you log the guys that you work. You really only have two choices. You either tell people they're out of the band and you won't work them, or you log them. And most people don't take stuff out of their log, but some guys do, especially now that we're checking for it, and they probably just made a legitimate mistake. It's too bad they didn't realize it at the time and come back and work you again when you were in the band. But if somebody takes you out of their log, it kind of fits in the category of, you know, too bad. You should write to them and complain to them. It's not necessarily our fault, but
No,
It
I'm
is
not
the
saying
risk
it's
you
your
run
fault.
when you,
It's-
no,
it's
I know,
your
no,
best
I understand, but
guess. Yeah.
it's really a dilemma for guys down in the Caribbean, especially when you're running outside the US band and all these W's keep calling you and you really have no choice but to just log them and keep moving on because you're certainly okay. They're the ones at risk. And, you know, hopefully they keep it in their log and when we do bust something for being out of band, it hurts the guy who's out of band, not you.
Mhm.
Is it a
But,
penalty bust or is it a just removed queue bust?
It just lost QSO.
Yeah, except that in the
But-
case I mentioned, if he scrubbed his log, I got a nil, so I had 2 penalty QSOs on it.
Yeah. Well, that's so in the end, I'm going to tell you this right now. It's nothing is fair in ham radio contesting. Just in some ways, we keep trying to apply more and more precision, and I think we've reached the point of diminishing returns. Here's another interesting report that we use. Some of you may have received an email from AA3B earlier this week where he was saying, "Hey, send your login." Well, the reason is we generate a report here that says here are all the calls that we have not received logs for and how many QS times they've been reported in those logs. So we can see UI5R, 1,997 people worked on me, didn't send in a log. That's his prerogative. He didn't have to. There's a lot of people who don't. But like KB1EFS never sends in a log. It's okay. He doesn't have to, but doesn't stop us from asking him for it. Let's see here. Okay, so I think that's everything I wanted to do in the look in here. But that gives you some idea. Actually, it gives you a very sorry. When I came back, I clicked the wrong button. Okay, so but we spend a lot of our time looking at those reports. We've gotten pretty good at knowing, okay, based on what the report says, figuring out what might have happened or what probably happened or what configuration, data file change we need to make to fix the scores up. And I think overall it comes out pretty well. And the thing that keeps us honest, and I'm very proud of, is the log checking reports that we send out, because we give the participants the chance to see, okay, here's everything that we did. And people do write to us, just like you did, Andy, about the RT4F thing. And it's good for us to hear that, because it lets us know, is there a problem? Is there a systemic problem? Is there something we can work on? Is it an education problem? Sometimes we have found places where the software wasn't doing the thing that we expected it to. So the bug reports are really helpful. Okay, I'm going to talk about time. This is one of my pet peeves. But in the beginning, CQ Worldwide, the computer checking, and this would be 2000 to 2008 or so, it just matched call signs on a band. So if two guys worked each other, if a call appeared in one log on 20 meters and appeared the other log on 20 meters, it was considered good. But I ran into a situation where somebody was arguing about a QSO being valid or not. And I realized that one guy had the QSO in his log on Saturday and the other guy had the QSO in his log on Sunday. And I'm like, why are we having this conversation? There was clearly not a QSO there, or if there was, there were two halves. And so I asked Ken to put in time matching. So now, beginning around 2010, for all the contests, we're looking for matches within a time window, within plus or minus 10 minutes. So there are a lot of people who are used to the old way, where they would send in they would type their login and the time would be 000 Zulu for every QSO. Yeah. And once we started matching to a time window, those all became bad because they were not matching within the 10 minutes. Now, I'm happy to say we've been doing this long enough now that most people have figured out time matters and they get it right. The kind of mistakes that we're seeing are the daylight savings time shift that I talked about, or sometimes people will have a computer crash and then they come back into the contest and so they type all the 10 QSOs they logged on paper and they'll all have the same time. And so that causes a little bit of a problem, but we can usually figure those out. But time is super important. You want time to be correct in your log if you can, because if they don't match in the time window, it's a nil for both sides. Now, because we're paying so much attention to time now, and time is getting so good or getting better, We do also use this for checking rubber clocking and off times and this kind of stuff. And this is where the logs and the times and the SDR recordings become really valuable, because you put all three of those together. We can find out when people are rubber clocking to beat the 10-minute rule. And we can also find when people are transmitting multiple times on, or multiple bands at this, or, you know, have multiple transmitters at the same time, because we can see when the most likely time that occurred was. So please get the time right in your log. That was the point of the slide. Another thing that we do is we get the FCC license data every Monday, or on Monday after the contest, and we use this for a couple of things. Number one, we use it to know to be better informed, I should say, what zone or location stations are where we didn't get a log from them. We'll look at their state in the FCC data and assume that. It's not perfect, but gets us way closer than anything else we found. The other thing we do is we look at the license class, and especially in the sideband contest, we'll report out QSOs that are not within the licensee's license class for bands. This is kind of an imprecise thing, because sometimes there'll be an extra class operator who is there, or who was the operator at the time. The call sign just happened to be a lower class license, but anyway, we're paying attention to that. And then the last thing is, if you work a call that we can't match up anywhere, and it's not in the FCC database, then we go ahead and mark it as bad. So you don't get the benefit of the doubt on these, because we know absolutely calls that are good or bad. Even there's occasionally people who got their license on that day or whatever, but they're easily fixed. Club names. This is my other pet peeve. I spend more time on club names probably than all the rest of the log checking together. People put all kinds of things in there for their club name, from abbreviations like NCCC, or partial spellings of their club names, or they'll misspell it just by accident, or whatever the case may be. Computers are smart, or they're not smart. Computers are, hey, does this match what I know? If so, great. If not, well, then it's another club. And so I spend a lot of time editing logs to get the official full club names. And you may have noticed when you do a log submission, if you have a club name that's not one that we can find in the database, we'll flag it. We won't throw an error, but we'll give you a warning and say, hey, you know, if you want, there's a dialog box here. You can start typing your club name, and we'll tell you the full name that we have in our database. So we're trying everything we can to get people to do the right name, but please get it right. If you enter it right, that saves me a lot of time, because as it is, I have to look through every club, and then I have to say, okay, is this spelled right or not? And if it's not, then I have to fix it. And you'd just be amazed how long that takes. And the reason it's so doubly important is in the contest where we've got CW and sideband, we're actually, you know, we do the logs and we're finished with sideband, and then we do CW, and then it's like, oh, we got to make both of these things line up for the club scores for the CW results. So it helps if we get all the names in a standard way. One of the things CQ Worldwide does, probably more than any of the ARL contests or almost any other contests, is there is a group of people that are dedicated to do investigation of rule infractions. So there's a lot of stuff. So I lead the team that does the log cleaning. So our job is the mechanics. We get the logs in, we get them processed, we get the scores so they're where they're supposed to be. There's another group of people who are trying to figure out who the bad guys are. And so this is cluster use by the single ops, or multiple signals on a band, or people who aren't in the right power category or whatever. This is mostly manual work. They divide it into different things. The team will divide it into different areas that they're working on, and they'll use the reports from LC, they'll use the SDR recordings, they'll follow up on tips from entrants and so on. And they write up they do a write-up, almost like an investigator would do before handing something over to the district attorney. Here's all of my evidence that I have. Here's what I think the infraction is. Here's all the evidence that we have. And then it's up to the contest director to make the decision and to correspond with the entrant. So you may have noticed that disqualify one, there were a lot of people for unclaimed assistance. And this is ones where all the evidence that we see shows that they we're using the cluster. And unfortunately for a lot of those guys, I think it's just a language issues. Sometimes they don't understand single op means you can't use the cluster, because just about every other contest in the world lets you do that. But we asked them if they did, and if they deny, then sometimes they get disqualified. But this group takes a long time. So we're done with we do the high claims within 7 days after the contest. Pretty much the log checking mechanics is done. Everything after that is this investigations team trying to follow up on things, and their job is hard. It just takes a long time. So the last job of LC is to generate the files for the magazine. We've talked about that enough. Plaques are still having to be done manually. There's no easy way to do that automatically yet. LC is also generating files that then get converted into the website score database, highest hourly rates, box comments, all that kind of stuff. Of course, we get the log checking reports, and we move those over, put them behind an encrypted link so you can see yours, but no one else can see yours. And then obviously the public logs get copied over. But the great thing is with the score database and the website, everything's done with SQL queries to generate whatever breakdowns or score listings or records or whatever that we want. So now when we put all the scores in for a new year, we don't have to do anything to update the records. They get updated automatically. When you go to the page for records, we give you the latest records. There is one manual step when we email the link to the log checking reports, all the entrants, that's done manually. But we do that at about the same time the results come out.
Hey, Randy, are the public logs exactly as they were submitted, or are they being regenerated from the database?
They are as they were used for checking. So they may not be exactly the same as what was submitted, but they are what you see. So when we're done with all the log checking and everything, we're ready to make the public logs. We copy the logs from the repository over to the public logs folder. And in that process of copying them over, we go through and strip out all the personal identifiable information like email addresses and mailing addresses, that kind of stuff.
I see.
So,
but
if we
QSOs
corrected the
and such
times, or we correct, yeah, if we've made corrections to the logs, they'll be in the public logs.
I see.
And part of the reason we do that is so that when people do look at their log check report and then go look at the logs, we want them to be able to, if we didn't do it, if we showed what was as submitted, sometimes you wouldn't be able to figure out what the heck happened. At least what you're seeing is what we used for the checking. So now if there's a problem, we can get on the issue very quickly. And by the way, we had a couple of people after the worldwide CW results came out who reported an issue, and we were able to fix it really quickly. And the score database on the website is the system of record. So even though the magazine wasn't right anymore, the score database got updated with the corrections based on what these people had reported. And so that's always the place to go if you want to know what the actual true official results are. All right, so just last thing, timeline. I think I've kind of covered some of this already. For a worldwide sideband, contest the last weekend of October, the log deadline is 5 days. We're usually trying to do log cleaning as logs are coming in. My goal has always been to do the raw scores 2 days later. So on Sunday afternoon after the contest, we're pushing out the raw scores. These raw scores are really, really close. If we didn't have a magazine involved, we would be really close to being done. But unfortunately, there's usually more logs come in over the following, the next 60 days. So we can't really just be finished right away. And then also we got the investigations team doing their work on things. One of the things we do is as we're approaching the end of the log checking, or we think we're almost done, we'll send preview log checking reports to the top scores in each category. Just so they can take a look. Usually those guys are pretty interested in what we took out of their logs, and sometimes they'll find things that we're really glad we found. So that's a step that CQ does. I don't think ARL does. Anyway, once the investigation team is done, the director's on the hot seat. He's got about 15 days to get through notifying the entrants, taking whatever appeals they have, and generating the write-ups and everything, and then getting that to the magazine. And then the magazine just has their publication time that they have to deal with. But it's a pretty repeatable process, and we have it helps to have a team. So there's 4 people on the log processing team, and then another half dozen or 8 people on the investigations team. And so everybody generally knows what their area of expertise is. And so we grind through things pretty quickly.
A question, Randy?
So with that, Yep.
That's 6TV. First, a quick one, a couple of questions. First, a quick one. Does the log uploader check for missing exchanges? Like you?
Yes.
So,
and it will tell you.
And it will reject it, so you won't have to put in the 00.
We won't let you submit the log until there's something in every field that's supposed to be there.
Good.
So so if you're missing an exchange, you don't get the submit button. You get the dialog box that says, hey, there's a missing exchange on line 438.
Okay.
Go fix it.
And then I was a little lost on the zone thing, 2 scenarios. First scenario, you worked VE2, was it ZL? He's really in zone 5, but he's telling everybody zone 2. It's my only zone 2 multiplier. Do I get credit for zone 2 if I logged what he sent, which was 2? Yeah. Or is it scored as if he was in zone 5?
It's scored because we know he's in zone 5. It's scored as though he's in zone. The country file does the scoring.
Right. So I don't lose a queue.
The exchanges do the check.
So I don't lose the queue because
that's what
okay. But I do lose the multiplier effectively.
Yeah, and this is a problem for multi-singles, right? Multi-singles who have a multiplier transmitter sometimes get walloped, like that guy who used KL1A one year in New York. And a lot of people worked him thinking they were working Alaska, and he was really in New York. And so a lot of multi-singles got a little, they lost some points and caused some other problems because of the way the band change rules work in CQ Worldwide. The 10-minute timer starts when you work somebody. Well, we don't start the timer if it's not a multiplier. So anyway, that's a esoteric thing, but
so then the other
we try to account. We try to find those.
So the similar scenario is I wonder how much time I waste trying to dig out call signs that are 0 pointers. Like a W is calling me. I've already got his zone. I'm trying to get his call right once or twice. Am I wasting my time because it's going to be 0 points whether I bust his call or not, and I'm not losing any penalty if I get his call wrong and it's not a mult?
The penalty for a busted same country QSO is 0 times the penalty, which is 0. So yeah, so I don't. So yes, you don't have to be as accurate, other than pride.
Well, he might lose me if I was a multiplier, I suppose, if I didn't get him right.
Correct. Well, actually, if he logged you correctly and you busted his call, there's a good chance he'll get credit for it and you'll get the bust.
But well, would that show up in my LCR as a busted W?
Yes.
Okay. But no penalty, no harm, no foul, so to speak.
Correct.
Thank you.
Randy, a quick
Anyone
question.
else? I went a little longer than I meant to. Yeah, go ahead.
This is Andy, AE6Y. Great presentation, by the way. Thank you very much. It's really, really interesting, and I'm full of admiration for that work. I mean, and the automation and the amount of work and thought that went into it. Quick question: you mentioned in the investigations power, and I'm very curious if there's any way to deal with excessive power. I mean, my impression is the OM4000 is a standard amp in Europe, for example. There got to be an awful lot of people running more than 1,500 watts. Is there anything you do about that, or is that just kind of the way that the system works?
I've spent hours and hours and hours trying to think of all kinds of ways, both real and psychological, to solve this problem, only to realize it's unsolvable. So short of somebody going on site and reporting back to us, these guys are all run. The problem is, in some of these categories in Europe, 9 out of the top 10 guys are cheating. You just don't know which 9. So after a while, I guess I'll answer your question this way. In the US, I think things are very honest. Oh, on the overall people, except for some DXer who might get on and do a little bit of, hogging it up. For the most part, on the contest side, people are following the rules and doing the right thing. So the good news is for us, we know we're competing in a fairly level playing field. It's somewhat the same thing in Europe. Everybody knows that the other guys are cheating and they have to too. So they do.
So it's just a different playing field, but also level.
Correct. And,
Do you sometimes find
since
low power entries that you reclassify as high power?
Yes. And really QRP ones are usually the easy ones to figure out, but there are low power guys where it doesn't take, it's pretty obvious what's going on. And so sometimes instead of a straight up DQ, because we don't, because there may not be hard evidence, we'll just reclassify them. And that's our prerogative under the rules.
So let me get this straight. 9 out of the 10 guys in Europe in multi-category are running illegal power.
I didn't say that.
Giving an
something
example,
like that.
Bob. It's just giving an example.
Well,
Hypothetical.
I guess the more critical thing is, what if a Sing-A-Lot was obviously running high power and won the contest from Europe? Then what do you do? Running higher than 1500 watts, way higher, like an OM 4000. That's going to be a tough call.
This is why this is one of those conversations that contest directors, there's no point in having it, because we'll just go around in circles. And the problem is, unless we go to the on-site observer thing, how do we know the guy ran too much power?
Wasn't there an on-site observer thing for a while?
There was, I think it was for 1 year, maybe 2, but it's incredibly impractical.
Yeah.
So it died a legitimate death.
Yeah, I think 4L58, Alex, wasn't he the guy he sponsored? Because I know that happened. Tom said he had 1 year at 8P5A.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's a thing, it doesn't do any good to send observers to places that are going to be okay.
Right. That was a bad choice.
In the end, there just aren't. I mean, WRTC is great because we have the luxury of being able to put referees in each place. We don't have that in the worldwide, or in the other contests. So we just have to deal with it. But again, in the US, I think things are I think each region is generally competing against people of the same mentality.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, can you give any insight into it's pretty impressive that it can chew through all that and do all that in a minute, what was it, 1 minute?
Yeah.
Can you give any insight into, like, not the algorithms themselves, but just the way it organizes things? Like, does it look at 10-minute windows and march through all the data at the same time, or does it, hash the call signs? And the second question is, do you have any opinions about the feasibility and the value? Those are 2 different questions, I guess, of real-time, actual real-time scoring, so that, at the closing bell of the contest, who won?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, one of the reasons we use a pretty beefy server is Ken will load up all the QSOs for the entire contest into memory. So that speeds things up a lot. And then he essentially builds a structure for each log, and each QSO has a number of, parameters that get assigned to it on good, bad, band change violation, whatever, all the different error conditions get assigned to it. So then when he goes back to do the scoring, it's just a matter of saying, okay, this QSO, it's good, bad, here's what the reason was, and so on. But I don't really know the details beyond that of how he figures it. To me, the amazing one is the off by 1s, off by 2s, that kind of stuff. It's pretty incredible. As far as real time goes, I think that would be a wonderful thing. But it's just not practical today. I mean, look how much trouble we're having with people not wanting to do not wanting to do the real-time scoreboard, where all you're doing is just posting your score, and people like, there's a lot of people who just don't even want to do that. So getting to real-time is going to require everybody to be connected all the time, and we can all think of 10 times where that wasn't a good thing for us. Like when I operate from V4, it would cost me a fortune to do real-time logging. I'd rather not. And I think that's just what we're going to run into for a long time. And so I think it's worth experimenting, maybe in some of the domestic contests and so on. In certain cases, like K9CT is pushing it for the collegiate championship thing he's helping organize. But in general, especially for international contests, I just don't think it's practical.
So
Okay. I want to be, sorry, I want to be sensitive to your time. Do you have a few more minutes or do you need to?
No, I do have a few more minutes. My son is in town and I know they're all waiting for me to come cook dinner. So that's the only deadline we have.
Okay, well, let's take a couple more questions and then
I'd like to jump in here if I oh, go ahead, Ken.
Okay, yeah, first, a couple of thank yous and then a question. Thanks to your many years and the time and talent that you and your whole team has put in to get this system right. The other thank you is, I think you said Bud was sending out the reminders. If I had not gotten that email, I'd have missed the deadline yesterday. We had some confusion in the multi-op team about who was going to do the log submission. It's really my job since
I saw NR60 in the reverse logs missing thing for a while. And it's like, wow, I wonder when they're going to send their log in.
Yeah,
but
well,
you
it
made
was
it.
a team communications problem. The question is not about log checking, but the entry page, at least for WPX, did not have a line for.
Oops, you just muted.
Yeah, Ken, you muted.
Ken, you need to unmute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll start over on the question. It's not to do with log checking, it's to do with the entry page. When I submitted the log, I tried to give credit to the station call, which we do in not only single multi-ops, but when we have a single op operator. I tried to enter it as NR60 at N6RO and it rejected that. So
in the call sign field.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the call sign field needs to be a call sign because we are going to use that to name the file and all the downstream steps. So you need to put that in the operator column, in the operators. So where you list all your operators at the end, you put at N6RO and then you'll be fine.
Oh, okay. Thanks. That cleared me up.
But if you didn't do that, I'll see it and I'll fix it.
Okay.
Hey, Randy, this is Dave, K6TQ. How often do you get paper logs? Is that a small percentage?
It is, I think we were down to, let's say last year, I think we might have had 40 paper logs out of 15,000 entries or 16,000 entries, something like that. So the CQ 160 contests, its rules state they're not taking paper logs. For CQ and WPX, we discourage it by removing the address to mail them to. But if you figured out how to send them to us, we would get somebody to type them in.
Okay, thanks.
A couple more questions, Randy.
Dennis,
Thank you.
go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I also second the appreciation for all the work and a lot of other things that have to do with log checking. And one thing especially is the public logs. Having public logs with such a wealth of information is an amazing resource. Having said that, I'm wondering why are the log checking reports private and not public? I think that would be useful for a couple of reasons, and I can get into those another time. And the second question, if I still may get that one in as well, is as a contest director, what was your toughest decision ever?
So to answer your first question, I think the reason log checking reports are kept private is not everybody has a stellar one. And we don't want to discourage people from entering the contest. And some of the ones, especially for a guy who might make 50 QSOs and have 10 busts with the ×3, suddenly his log looks really terrible. Well, it's not really, so anyway, we decided not to make those public. I think the participants are welcome to make theirs public if they want to and share them with people. And by the way, we do have a page.
Yeah, sorry, Scandinavian
So
contest, as you probably know, does it, for example.
Which one?
The SAS, Scandinavian activity.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, every contest can make that decision, and maybe we'll reach the point where it's okay. I think in the beginning, it was pretty, people weren't comfortable with the idea. One of the things we do is there's a page in the Worldwide and the WPX websites where we show the log checking reports for the high score in each of the major categories and for the director. So and I did that because I wanted people to see what a log checking report looks like. And usually the guys that are top scorers are pretty good. So I wanted people to see that yes, it really is possible to make 5,000 or 10,000 QSOs and then not have huge numbers of errors. So it's more of here's something to aspire to, as opposed to here's something to embarrass you.
Yeah.
So that was the answer to that. As far as the hardest thing, every time you disqualify somebody, it's hard. Think about it. You're essentially writing to somebody who's in the same ham radio fraternity you are, somebody you may have worked hundreds or thousands of times, and you're essentially saying, hey, I think you're a cheater. It's really hard. And so you do it carefully and you make sure that you have your evidence and you deal with it. I think there are some people in the hobby who are pathological and that they're completely undeterred by lying, and so they're the most difficult ones because the honest guys will almost always admit or acknowledge or accept. The other guys, they just can't believe that you're going to make it do something like that to them, and they'll give you all kinds of reasons why not, but they never deny. They always just give you a reason why it's not true. They always give you some other reason it's not true.
I've got a couple of
They deflect the conversation. Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I lost a bunch of audio because my internet connection died. So maybe you've talked about this before, but this is a question that came up in WPX, which is these made up bogus prefixes. Like one guy's on K86 something portable NZ7. I mean, does that count as an NZ7 or a K7 or what?
Yeah, this is one of those ones that's somewhat traditional or historical, and you just have to know it, but the rules try to tell you this. So somebody who's operating in a country different than their own has to indicate portable in that country. It just so happens in the United States, we don't care what you use as your country identifier. So whether you say stroke W7 or stroke NZ7, there's no FCC rule that says you have to use one versus the other. And under the WPX rules, if you use W7, you count as a W7. If you use NZ7, you count as an NZ7. That's just what it is.
Okay.
It's been that way for 30 years.
What happens if I'm WX5S stroke WY6? Would I count as a WY6?
Nope, because you're not in a different country.
Oh, okay. So it goes.
You only get this little quirk if the call sign is not indicating the country that you're in. Then you have there's a certain AH2 who lives on Long Island who doesn't ever send stroke anything. He just sends AH2 call sign, and there's some KL7s who do the same thing down in the continental United States, and we just have to deal with them.
Yeah, I've worked
in the
with those
scoring.
guys. Yeah. A question on dupe checking. Sorry, you may have covered this. All contests, there's various things about this. One contest sponsor, I really irritates me because they just have a rule that the second cue doesn't count at all. And some guys will match up. If I make 2 cues with you, all they get scored, and then I get credit for one of them that's the highest score in half I would get credit for, and the other guy would get credit for his highest scoring half. So I could get full credit for one of the cues and the other guy could get full credit for a different cue. Or some people have, how do you guys do that? Did you understand my question?
I think so. So we actually take a little bit different approach. If you make a valid QSO, in other words, you work somebody and you both get the time band exchange information correct, that counts as a good one. Let's say you work a dupe and you bust something in the first QSO and you get it right in the second one.
Yeah.
We count the second one.
For me, but what about for the other guy?
It's, well,
right
twice. The way we do things, it's only about you. What difference does it make what we do with the other guy? We only matters what we do for you. Okay. But it turns out in his case, it would be the same thing. If he got it all right on the first one and messed up something on the second one, he'd get credit for the first one. The bottom line is,
okay, you're doing it like I
QSO
suggested the second one. In that case, I'd get credit for the second queue. He'd get credit for the first queue.
Yeah, I think that's pretty rare, but yes, we want a valid QSO to have happened. That's what we're trying to find.
Well, actually, my question is more like where I'm trying to get a number. Guy calls me it's a dupe. He's a real weak son of a bitch. I know it's a dupe. He probably busted my call in the first queue. And how much am I going to struggle to get his friggin' number in the second queue, you see? So the first one, okay, I know he's got my call right now this time. And well, if I get close on the second queue, then that's a case where this could happen where, you know, am I going to spend 2 minutes getting the exact right number? You follow what I'm saying? Or can I just, I mean, if I'm going to get credit for the good queue from my end on the first one, I won't try as hard on the second one.
Yeah, well, I think there's a famous quote from Dirty Harry that applies in this case, and it's just, do you feel lucky?
You feel, yeah. Oh, I try to get all it. I try to be as good as I can, but you know, everybody makes mistakes. This is all.
I never really
kind of curiosity.
Yeah.
I've also written some of these log checking algorithms, so I'm curious.
What do you do for when somebody sends different exchanges in different parts of the contest?
Well, it turns out we're matching, as long as their log shows what they sent, everything is good.
Okay.
So yes, if you sent one number for the first half and if you sent one zone for the first half and a different zone for the second half, okay, that'd be a problem. But as long as your log shows what you sent, we'll give people credit for copying the right thing.
Do you also give credit for being off by one QSO number on receive?
I don't know.
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I did an experiment in sweepstakes CW once, and I know I've got the number right, and I asked for a number repeat and see if the guy sent me the real number or a number plus one. And it turns out, at least in that year, I was getting number plus one 30% of the time.
That does happen.
If you don't allow plus or minus one, there's an issue with that because the guy may have actually sent the damn thing plus one.
Yeah. Well, each contest has a slightly different approach to that, but yeah, it works that way for the reason that you say.
Hey, Randy, I have a quick question. This is Chris N6WM. I'm still having a little bit of trouble kind of wrapping my head around the country file piece. The country file determines the location piece.
Yeah.
So here I am, I'm in San Francisco, you know, and I'm like, you know, I really want a little bit better edge. So I'm going to go drive to Arizona and fire up at my buddy's house in Arizona. And I just fire up with my call sign, right? And just do it from there. And that's it, right? Now, does that mean that the country file is going to say that I'm in W6 and maybe be busted until you figure out that I was at my buddy's house in Arizona down the log checking?
If you send in a log, then you put a location, you filled in the location field as AZ. So therefore, that's what we use. Okay. It's for when we don't have a log that we have to do a little bit of extra work. Gotcha. And think about it, this only really applies to worldwide, and we're only trying to figure out the zone. Okay. So it's actually not as big of an issue as you would think.
Yeah. What was the answer to the question of should I log what the guy sent or should I log what he meant? Because sometimes guys will send me the wrong damn zone, and I know the numbers. I know it's wrong, you know. So what do I do?
If you put in what it should be, you're more likely to be right.
Aha. Okay. Thank you.
All right, let's have
With
one more
people in
question.
zone 17, 16, zone 16 and 17, possibly Russians being the exception. Or VKs being the exception. I don't know, whatever, but
That VE2.
It sends up being noise to your score when it's all said and done.
Yeah. This most often happens with a VE or some other guy that, you know, he tells me what state he's in. Okay, great. I know what zone you're in. And I don't know. I get it. Okay.
Yeah, happens in ITU. Sometimes they send the CQ zone. Can we have one more question?
Yes.
Is WWROF going to handle IARU logs someday? In terms of log checking?
Not that I'm aware of, because I don't think they've even asked us to look at that. I know it's not being handled by ARL, but I don't know who they got to do it.
That's my question.
I don't know. That's beyond my purview here. But anyway, I'm gonna run. But I thank you all very much. This actually lasted way longer than I expected to, but I knew there would be some questions.
Thank you, Randy.
Be careful with all this information, because it's, you know, there's a lot of judgment in all of this, and we're not playing for money. So in the end, it really is a game, and we're just trying to make sure that the order of finish is correct and the scores are correct, and people get enough feedback to improve. So as long as you kind of keep it in that vein, none of this stuff gets overly serious.
Thanks,
Some of the
Randy.
guys have spent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Randy. This is great.
Awesome
Learned a lot.
presentation, Randy. Thank you.
All right.
So Randy,
Yes.
Randy, for a guy from the Gulf Coast, what are you cooking?
I think I've got hamburgers on the menu today by popular demand. And some of them are even the non-beef kind, which is really hard to take, but that's what we're doing.
I'm looking forward to crawfish in a few weeks.
Oh, I was never a big crawfish fan, but some people are.
Louisiana, guilty.
I will see you guys on the radio.
Enjoy, Randy.
So long.
All right.
Very good, Randy. Thank you.
Excellent.
So I wanted to say, if Andy, if you want to take up the discussion that we had to cut short a little earlier.
Thank you, Sal.
If there's people that still had things to say about that, this would be a good time.
Well, I guess what we were talking about was the WPX recent contest. I'm not sure if anybody has anything further to say about that. We were talking about in part that rule change, which Randy obviously is in favor of. And, you know, I assume that the real purpose of it was just to sort of stimulate participation.
No.
People are using it.
Yeah. What's the cost of the category, guys?
Well, the other argument was supposedly that it made the log checking. It said they didn't have to check for cheaters and
it's too hard to find packet cheaters, so they gave up.
Yeah. Well, I think
just to find, but I think also
makes that actually, I can't really say this because when I was, for example, on Aruba, I was running it 100% of the time, so the packet would have been irrelevant completely for me. However, for people who are, you know, like here, how important were packet spots? For those of you who did use packet spots, how much did it matter, and did you really get a lot more multipliers by doing it? Does anybody have a comment on that?
Well, I can say that on in a multi, it can be important.
If you have an in-band station, it's huge because you need to have another guy that's always
but
lining up the next
it's
queue.
always been allowed for multi. I mean, packets have always been allowed for multi-ops. This is a single op issue purely.
Well, I felt like I was getting more guys finding me even single ops than used to be. When I just CQing, it seemed like find a new frequency CQ and there's immediately guys calling me.
Yeah, I've noticed that in NAQP that there's a fair number that are doing M2 even if they're single ops, and you call CQ and you get jumped on.
Multi. This is the thing I've noticed in some of these contests. I get a packet pileup, but the guys that are calling me are entering unassisted. And it's just bullshit, Half of these guys calling me, they're assisted. That's how they jumped on me when I just got there,
Gary, what were you saying, NA60?
Yeah, because that was my main purpose in noodling around the contest is I exclusively work club members, and every time I hear one, I spot them. So, because I know, just like Matt said, I will instantly create a cluster pilot for that person, for people who don't, for especially people who don't understand reverse beacon, and it's super important in SSB. And it works.
Hey, how come you didn't work me in WPXCW?
That's exactly why I did.
And I was doing the same thing, Gary.
Yeah.
By the way,
Gary, you didn't spot KR70 once because I didn't work you.
Well.
Well, it's much appreciated when you did it for us.
The issue isn't whether you should spot people. The issue is just whether you're single op assisted versus regular single op, now that the categories are essentially merged.
Yeah. I mean, the trade-off, I think, is,
But there was a lot of comment about this in the 3830 write-ups from lots of people who felt strongly enough about it to say something.
To say that they want the category back?
In general, yes. Yeah. And as I said, a number of people in the write-up said that they felt so strongly that they actually entered Classic.
That's what I did.
Yeah, and you said that too, Bob, right?
I guess the question is there an advantage to being assisted?
Sure.
If there isn't, then it doesn't really make a difference if they're the same category.
Well, I think there is an advantage because you can find the new ones on when things get slow. If they get slow.
Right.
We have 216 guys that submitted an unassisted challenge for CW.
Oh, good. Okay.
So, by the way,
that's more than phone, isn't it?
Comment on
No, that's for CW.
How much work are they saving by eliminating a category? I mean, what's the big deal? Why,
it's the guys who have to do the investigations. I mean, they have to get all the logs from the RBN and the skimmers and the cluster nodes, and it's probably a real pain in the butt.
On this issue, if I may. So I think that although Bill is obviously right on the money here, I don't think it's necessarily the difficulty is in figuring out who's assisted, who's not, who's cheating, who's not. It's what they do with it. It's the investigation, and as Randy said, it's notifying them that you're a cheater, and we're going to do something about it and disqualify. I think the difficulties from that, even though it was never brought up in that CQ contest conversation, but I think that is one of the main reasons why they've combined.
I see. So it's just more hassle to verify that those guys really were unassisted.
Well, verify, I think it can be done, right? If you look at the cluster statistics data and Jose, CT1BOH, for like 10, 15 years ago, I think was talking about scrubbing the cluster data and comparing it, basically using it as what now could be called a big data algorithm. So when you have an open log and when you have a cluster data that's public, you can figure out whether the person was using the cluster or not relatively easily with some statistical analysis, right? So it's not really the difficulty of understanding who's cheating or not, but it's what you do with that information that's difficult, I think.
It takes the time. And he is a new director of WPX, relatively new, I believe, maybe his first year or second year. So
first.
So as when you sign up to take that difficult job, I guess you get to make the rules.
Well, yeah, and I'm not really against. I was raising it as an issue. I don't have a strong feeling. I think occasionally changing rules in these contests is not a bad idea. It shakes things up a little bit, and things end up, the chips fall a little differently than they did. It's not necessarily better or worse.
I will say I enjoyed the contest more, having to sit through it for only 24 hours of that difficult exchange and the loud static crashes at night. And
I kind of wish there was a
CW contest for a long time.
I kind of wish there was a 24-hour category that let you use 2 radios and everything. But
well, it's an interesting question about, for example, as I understand the rules, you can't listen on. Well, you can listen on 2 bands if you have a radio that will do it, even though it's only 1 radio. You can't listen while you're transmitting. But if you have an older radio, you can only listen on the band, obviously, that you're on. But, flexes and the K4 and so on will allow you to listen on 2 bands, literally. So there is some inequity there, just in the choice of radios, which is kind of interesting.
I would assume that by by saying that, they mean you can't use the flex to listen to on a second band, even though it's one radio.
Doesn't say that. I don't know. I would not interpret the rule that way, actually. I mean, for me, the second radio for me would be on a different band if I had it. But I don't think the rules certainly don't say that. They just say one radio.
But if you enter something and you know, there's an SO2R category and you're using one radio and doing, but it's a 66 OOM, you know, it should enter SO2R. I mean, I would always do that. It's basically the same kind of operation.
But the R is generally transmit. There's no prohibition against SO2V.
Yeah.
That's true.
2VFO, same band. I think within the spirit of the rules, they expect you to be listening. If you're doing SO2V, it'd be one band.
Well, but
not two.
here's the question. For example, if you have a K4, you can be running on one band. You can
Yes.
have,
I understand. You explained that already.
You can have the pan adopter on another band watching for openings. So you're not even listening. You're simply watching for openings. Or
Right.
an SDR, if you had an SDR on the output of your radio.
Well, I think the intent of the rule is to be transmitting and listening on one band at once. That's how I interpret it in the classic category.
Well,
by the
I
way,
think
you
that
can
was
do
the
that.
original intent, and I agree with that, and that's how I do it. However, I think with modern radios, there is room for creative interpretation. So
You can, Andy, you can do that with a K3 also. K1GQ figured out how. And it's coded into Skookum Logger.
Okay, well, that's Dave. Thanks for reopening my discussion here, but I think it's gosh, 3:30. This has been kind of an interesting meeting.
Sure changed since the days of the paper, pencil, and Duke sheet.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, people are welcome to hang out, but also welcome to quit here.
Yeah, contest got easier to log and harder to win, something like that.
Yeah. I remember the first field day I went to. There was a piece of wood with a nail on it, and you'd write the contact in it, and then you slam it on the piece of wood with the nail in it.
Seems like
But,
a workplace injury waiting to happen.
Bob, at the last meeting, Bob, when you were looking at our last meeting, you were asking for ideas about contest forum, and I raised the issue about the classic being an overlay, and it should be a category.
Yeah.
So exactly that has happened. You didn't bring that up, but that's the exact issue. If you look on 3830 now, where KP2M has reported a classic score for 36 hours, he hasn't reported a 24-hour score. But I've reported my 24, and I'm second to him. And my score is about 2/3 of his, which is kind of interesting, which may mean it's okay.
So you have to wait for the log checkers to figure out what his real score is for 24 hours.
Right. Or, well, he's just got to count the first 24 hours. I mean,
right.
He could do that easily, I think, by changing, by segmenting his log, so to speak, and doing a new one. But because it's an overlay and not a separate category, he is actually competing in both categories, single op, unassisted, and classic.
No,
we don't know
he
what
can.
his
I believe
is.
when he submits his Cabrillo, it's going to indicate the classic overlay or it's not, and that's the category he'll be listed in the magazine.
That's not true. No. Because it's an overlay. That's the exact issue I asked you guys to talk about. Because it's an overlay category, you can be in two categories. You're in your main category. It's just like tri-bander and wire is an overlay.
I see. It actually says it says any single operator entrant who meets the requirements may also enter one of the category of the overlays.
But that's why they call them overlays, and I disagree with that. I think it should be a separate category.
Why? How is it affecting you?
It's affecting me in two ways, I guess. One is that I think that classic entrants who are 24-hour people should compete against other 24-hour people. I think that's
he's only operating 24 hours against your log for that category.
Well, you asked how it's affecting me, and I'm telling you my opinion. My opinion is I should be competing against other 24-hour people who are making the same kind of choices for 24 hours. The other way is we don't know what his score is. It's very
well. He's at a disadvantage because he can only operate his first 24 hours, if you will. Let's assume they were all consecutive, weren't the optimal 24 hours of the contest. So you have an advantage over him.
No, that may well be. That's entirely possible.
Yeah, and he's going to be more tired overall too. I mean, Yeah,
on the first
you're gonna
24
kick his
hours.
ass.
Well, maybe so. I mean, that may be true, and I may have actually won it. But I'd like to compete against other classic people who are 24-hour people. I think that's the way it ought to be.
You bring up a good point, Andy, and I guess that the overlay is kind of the question that I have. I see a lot of people doing a single band entry and then using tri-band and wires as an overlay. I thought you needed to be all band to be able to do that.
That doesn't make sense, does it?
No, it really doesn't. And I see a number of people out there on 20 that are using both of those, tri-band and wires, and 20 only.
Well, I think the log checkers will figure that out. I mean, 3830 is just a volunteer score posting thing, so people can get a lot of stuff wrong.
Yeah, they may mean that they only have one antenna as opposed to two.
No, that's not what tri-band and wires says. It says you get a tri-bander and on 10, 15, and 20 and a wire for everything else.
Does it say single tri-bander?
No.
Does it say you have to be all band, or does it say that that is also an overlay for single band?
It doesn't say all band.
No, I think it's an overlay for anything, probably. I mean, you could be on 20 meters with a tri-band.
Oh, I could.
But
right.
they don't list single band in the results. They don't list 20-meter single band and separate tri-bander wires from another.
No.
On 3830, it's sitting out there.
On
so
3830, nobody
There's
cares.
a lot of extra categories, I think, that don't really exist like that.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
3830 is a different process than the real whatever.
Log checking, right?
Okay.
Does that harken to also say that this classic category that the people that didn't want to do assistance flocked to may not be quite as ideal as maybe they thought also, and that there may be a lot of surprises coming out of the log.
Hey, Chris, you're barely audible. Can you turn up your gain or something?
Oh, sorry. Did you catch what I said though?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if it's less than ideal alternative, right? And that the real alternative is N6MJ's program, right? Where you just didn't use assistance and you submitted your log to him, and that's the only way. But maybe there might be some surprises coming out of the overlay category.
Well, but classic is also one radio, and the unassisted N6MJ's thing would allow two, SO2R, classic SO2R.
Yeah.
It's just not use a packet. So
I see. I don't know, just throwing it out there.
Yeah,
the great thing
we did
about
require,
classic
you do
now
have
is
to.
that 24 hours is really nice. If you're just going crazy and the thing's ringing in your head and you want to take time off, you can do it without feeling guilty, which is, I think, a wonderful feature of it.
I like
agree.
the category.
I agree, but I also disagree with Dave that I think that you can't just create a bunch of 24-hour categories because people are looking for convenience. I think part of the deal is it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to be inconvenient. It's a competition.
I think actually it's the reverse. I think the 24-hour category was created for people who want to operate only 24 hours, not 36 or 48, and who have the simplicity of one radio. I think it was designed to encourage participation by us perhaps us older people, or people who only don't have an SO2R shack and think they can't compete.
Well, no, I agree with that. But what I was saying is Dave chimed in and said, well, I wish that there was a 24-hour category for the SO2R operator. And then that opens up a whole new can of worms, right? And, I think it's supposed to be difficult, right? It's supposed to be challenging and not to be morphed into convenience. In this particular case, with the single radio and the 24 hours, it has a kind of a defined mission, right? But to start creating subcategories of shorter operating times to accommodate people's schedules, I think is a little bit pushing it, in my opinion.
Well, I don't think there's going to be a classic 10-meter and a classic 15-meter, right? It's just for all band.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I also think that 48-hour contests,
they're too hard.
with the aging population, it's not just convenience; it's like health and
it's medically dangerous.
Well, I found in WPX, it's a little, the strategies are a little simpler because it's mostly, if you're placed like Aruba, it's just a rate contest pretty much. Although you may want to, make sure you get a JA opening if you can find one. But in CQ Worldwide, the classic category really has a lot of trade-offs. I mean, CQ Worldwide does anyway, but if you're only in it for 24 hours, yet you're trying to get mults on 6 bands, that really involves some thinking about your on and off times and some luck in picking them correctly. So there's really an element, a very interesting element to it that I think that the shorter time period kind of forces you into.
Well, Andy, I just point out that I only worked you on one band in this contest. I probably could have found you on more bands. I was too busy listening to one radio and CQing instead
Well, next
of trying
time
to
use
find
Packet, Bob, and help me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Listen.
it might be a disadvantage to your score that people can't find you as quickly.
You know, a lot of people did. And the thing that drives me crazy about the packet spots are when I get dupes as a result of packet spots.
Well, I'm just spotting you wrong.
Yeah, either that or what happens is I'm spotted correctly the second time, but the first time I wasn't. And so people think they work P40Y instead of P49 or something. And it just, it's kind of what you were saying, Matt, too. When you get a weak signal that's a dupe and you're trying to think, do I keep asking for repeats on the number? And I know it's a dupe, but you don't know if the first contact was logged correctly or not by him. So you don't really know it's a dupe, literally.
Well, that's one of the reasons I tell most dupes to go away. And then if they insist, then I know, all right, he got me wrong the first time. If he goes away, he got me right the first time.
It's too hard to do that on CW.
It's easy. Your log does it for. It's easy. Your log checking program, your software does it for you. It's easy.
No, because people don't go away, and you know,
80% go away, 20% don't.
All right.
Well, yeah. Hey, I've got a question. Maybe TV Bob, you know the answer to this.
No, I'm gonna go make dinner. No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's a RBN packet spotting thing. Some of the better sources of spots, like VE7CC, there's a voting algorithm that runs, and a lot of these bogus spots just don't come out of his machine. But there's lots of other nodes where you kind of get more of the raw thing. They're not voting, and so you see more busted spots.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Is there a way to tell who's the higher quality spots, or you just have to listen to one for a while? I mean, what brought this up, I was at NW6P and I'm looking at whoever he's using. I'm going, no, you got to ditch this thing. And I changed who he got his feed from, but I think you understand the question. Yeah.
Yeah. Which node were you getting the bust from? Bye, Chris.
Oh, I don't know. It was some W7.
NC7J.
Yeah, that's raw data from his skimmer.
Yeah.
All RBN.
No, it's from all the RBN, but I didn't have skim valid enabled, so that's probably what was making it go bad. If you turn on the skim valid filter, you get CT1DOH's algorithm, which is really good.
Right, and I recommend most people the easiest way is to connect to a CC cluster. Although apparently a CC cluster, the entire thing went down about 45 minutes before the end of the contest.
So every major contest I've seen, CW contest, I've seen the ECC go down in the last like 2 years.
Yeah, but before it goes down, it works great because it automatically eliminates the dupes, or sorry, eliminates the single one, the busted ones very well by requiring at least the same call to be spotted twice by two different skimmers before it considers it legit.
I wonder what happens if you get badly misspotted and you're logged as that by 20 people, then you get 20 nils.
No, well, they're either dupes that don't count for you anyway. If the log checking software is very good at figuring out that they logged P49Y wrong, but they logged it as P40Y, but you logged their call correct. So P49Y does not lose the queue, and they lose the queue because they busted the call.
Right.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
If it's a dupe, it's still an invalid. It's still not counted for P49Y.
It is. If he logs somebody and it's not a dupe, but they log him as P40Y. Yeah.
Right. If it is a dupe,
then 0 points for Andy.
0 points for Andy. Yeah.
So, busted spots is one of the reasons I don't like to use spotting networks, is because busted spots are very distracting. D7CC helps, the skim valid flag helps. Raw RBN feed not recommended unless you limit it to just like West Coast skimmers or something. But you have to use your own judgment, as the contest goes on. I wrote a little script for WinTest that shows you all the spots on a frequency. And so you can see real quick that there's 10 spots for P49Y and 1 for P40Y. So you know that that's the busted one. So it becomes real, you know,
Okay.
use your head to determine what's a busted call.
So if you can get those loud East Coast stations to use that, that would be great.
Well, Andy, when you start getting a whole bunch of dupes in a row, sign your call 3 or 4 times.
No, I sign my call all the time. That doesn't make any difference. The only thing I can do is move.
Well, if
The
you're
only
just,
effective remedy is
you're forgetting how the skimmer works. The skimmer will spot you.
100 hertz.
The skimmer will spot you if you move a little bit and sign your call twice. If you're just signing it once, it may not. And so if you want to get reposted and have the correct call sign replace all those busted spots in everybody's band map, try to move a little bit if there's room. And then because skimmer won't post you more than once per 10 minutes if you don't move. An individual skimmer.
How far do you have to move, do you think? Is it a kilohertz or not?
That's less than that. I mean,
That's like 300 hertz. Yeah.
It's not much.
And you might want to do that anyway, because you have a bunch of guys zero beat with you anyway. And it's like, oh, great. Now they're a little offset. Sweet.
One of my tricks, you know, since the spotting network is only accurate to 100 hertz, is I will call CQ on .15 or .25,
I've often
025.25 or something, halfway between 200 hertz.
Frequencies helps, picking sort of weird.
Right. And half the guys call on .1 and half the guys call on .2.
Right.
It does
No, it's funny. I had I started off the contest very badly on 40. I had a rate of 120, which is actually not too bad on 40. Crivelli had 160, although he faltered later in the contest, as you can tell from his rate sheet. But I had trouble finding frequency. 40 was so crowded, and usually you can blow out a frequency for a ruble without too much trouble. And I started calling CQ. I worked a few guys, and then WC1M opened up.
Oh.
Wouldn't move. Now, the irony is, and so I ended up moving, it's very annoying, but the irony is in his write-up, he writes about the rudeness of people who wouldn't move for him. And I interpret that to mean not that he's a bad guy, but that this is just in the chaos of contesting. This is sort of what happens. And even those of us who think we're being ethical and good operators and only on clear frequencies, we're not necessarily.
Yeah, all you have to do is accidentally tap your swap VFO button, and suddenly you think, this guy's trying to take my frequency. It wasn't your frequency.
I made a couple mistakes too, which really annoyed me, where I forgot to lock the main frequency. And the K4, I guess the K3 has the same thing, where the RIT thing, if it's off, you can set it to make a large change in frequency, like if you want to tune through the band quickly.
Oops.
So I had my K-pod set up to do that, and I forgot to lock the main frequency, and somehow the RIT was off. I usually leave it on, but it was off. And therefore, I ended up changing my run frequency by mistake because I'd forgotten to lock it.
Yep.
Really annoying with that.
Well, fortunately, your log showed you what frequency you logged the last Q sign. You can go back to that. That's what I do.
Yeah, although I use my own program, it only shows it to whole digits. I don't show fractions. So, and on 40 meters early in this contest, there can be 20 stations and 2 kilohertz.
Well, one of the things that annoys me about the K4, and I'm trying to convince Wayne to change it, and maybe you can help, is that right now the K4 remembers the RIT state per VFO per band. The K3 was bad enough. It was per band. You had to go to every single band and turn the RIT on. And now you have to go to every single band and both VFOs to turn the RIT on. Otherwise, you swap VFO or something and your RIT goes off. And you go, wait, I had it on.
That's interesting, really.
But you can also change the RIT knob so it does nothing when it's on.
I know, but I like the idea of being able to tune quickly with it. It's actually kind of helpful. But that's probably a design choice where Wayne thinks his implementation is correct, isn't it?
Well, he thinks that there's corner cases where people will want an RIT in one receiver and no RIT in the other receiver. And I find that situation to be completely rare and would never bother with it. So.
Yeah.